And from my side, welcome to the seminar on African Renaissance and SeMOSHOESHOE in the context of African leadership. Dr. Pali Lahotla, Professor Muswene, and the delegation from the SeMOSHOESHOE Institute of Peace and Leadership, distinguished guests, colleagues, students, friends of the school, ladies and gentlemen, and those joining us online, you are all most welcome. Professor Pashwana will observe protocol in full in just a minute, so you will permit me to keep my welcoming and introduction and greeting short, which at a seminar of leadership, I hope it may be forgiven as a small act of delegation. My name is Charlotte Buitendag. I'm a professor at the Thabo Mbeki School, a proud professor at the Thabo Mbeki School, and I have the pleasure of directing this morning's proceedings. Two housekeeping matters before we begin, and I was just reminded of that when I heard a telephone ringtone. So please, would you please put your phones on silent? And we have a generous morning. But it's going to be a full one. So I'll be keeping a sensitive and a gentle eye on the clock. So speakers, let that be settled as a warning. We begin, as we should, with our host. Professor Edith Pashwana will open the seminar this morning as head of the host institution. She is acting executive dean of the Thabo Mbeki School, and before that, she led the Thabo Mbeki African Leadership Institute, better known as Tamale. She holds a doctorate in international development from London South Bank University in the UK, and her research covers public policy and governance, the transformation of higher education, and youth and women's leadership. She has an illustrious supervision record, and she has taught on the Young African Leaders Initiative at the Thabo Mbeki African Leadership Institute and on the Mandela Institute for Development Studies Leadership Program. She co-edited Black Academic Voices, the South African Experience, which won the National Institute for the Humanities of Social Sciences Award for the best edited volume. Very impressive. She was named one of the Mail and Guardian's top 100 women changing South Africa. We do have a leader that we are proud of. Professor Pashwana will welcome our guests and set out the school's purpose in convening this conversation. Professor, the floor is yours.
Program Director, Professor Charlotte Buitendag, thank you for your generous introduction and for also opening your opening remarks as the Program Director for this program. Let me acknowledge our keynote speaker, Dr. Pali Lahotla, our former Statistician General here in South Africa, the delegation from SeMOSHOESHOE Institute for Peace and Leadership at the National University of Lesotho, the delegation led by Professor Ginewe Muswene, accompanied by Mr. Dipapang Monesa, as well as Mr. Molemo Bereng. Let me also acknowledge members of the diplomatic corps represented here this morning. Our facilitator, Dr. Busisiwe Ntsele, the management of the Thabo Mbeki School, as well as staff and students, UNISA staff and students as a whole, our postdoctoral fellows at the TM School, distinguished members of the audience, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome on behalf of Professor Puleng Lenkabula. Good morning. Good morning. You seem not to be happy. I am happy today. Distinguished guests, colleagues, scholars, researchers, students, ladies and gentlemen, I am saying to you good morning and a very warm welcome at the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs. It is my pleasure, on behalf of the Thabo Mbeki School, to welcome our colleagues and distinguished delegation from the National University of Lesotho. Our colleagues come specifically from the SeMOSHOESHOE Institute for Peace and Leadership. How many of you have heard about the SeMOSHOESHOE Institute before? Professor Muswin, look at the back. How many of you? Let me see. Just raise up your hand. Yeah, 1, 2 out of the whole room. So that makes this visit a very important visit for the University of South Africa, because only 2 people have heard about the Institute. But by the end of today, the end of this seminar, more than 10, as you can see, more than 50 people would have heard about the Institute. So your visit here is not in vain. It was important that you avail yourself here. We are particularly honored to host you as we engage in this important seminar on African Renaissance and SeMOSHOESHOE in the context of African leadership. This is more than an academic gathering. It is an opportunity to place African ideas, African histories, and African leadership traditions at the center of conversations about the continent's present and future. The theme is particularly significant because the idea of an African Renaissance calls upon us to reclaim our intellectual agency. It challenges us to ask, what does it mean to lead Africa from an African perspective? What can our history teach contemporary leaders? And how can we draw from the wisdom of our forebears while responding creatively to the complex challenges of the 21st century? In this regard, King SeMOSHOESHOE I provides us with a particularly compelling leadership tradition. His leadership reminds us that African leadership has never been synonymous with power alone. It has been also about diplomacy, strategic vision, nation building, resilience, dialogue, and the ability to bring together people in difficult circumstances. SeMOSHOESHOE's legacy, therefore, invites us to think beyond leadership as an individual pursuit. It encourages us to consider leadership as a responsibility to build institutions, societies, and communities that can withstand adversity and create possibilities for future generations. This resonates strongly with the intellectual tradition associated with the Thabo Mbeki African School and with the broader vision of the African Renaissance as promulgated by His Excellency President Thabo Mbeki. The African Renaissance is not simply a celebration of Africa's past. It is a call to action to build an Africa that is confident in its identity, conscious of its history, intellectually independent, and capable of shaping its own destiny. As a school devoted to public and international affairs, we believe that universities have a particular responsibility in this endeavor. We must create spaces where African scholarship is not merely consumed, but produced, where African experiences are theorized from African perspectives, and where scholarship contributes meaningfully to policy, leadership, and social development. Today, seminars in many ways provides precisely such a space. I hope our discussions will allow us to interrogate the continuities and differences between the leadership traditions represented by SeMOSHOESHOE and the contemporary aspirations of the African Renaissance. More importantly, I hope we will move beyond historical admiration towards asking what practical lessons these traditions offer today's leaders. I know we speak of these leaders many times, and it's all about aspiration, it's all about romanticization, but what do we learn out of them? What do we take out of them so that it can be useful to how we lead today as a people? How do we cultivate leaders who are visionary without being detached from their people? Because we know that many of us today, when we get into leadership position, we become strangers. We no longer even answer people's phones. We blue tick people. And we have normalized it, and we think this is how leadership should be, inaccessible. And we also put gatekeepers around us so that we are not accessible at all. How do we build institutions that serve society rather than individuals? We know from the kind of leadership that we have that it's all about a person. A colleague of mine from Sierra Leone once said to me in a seminar, in Sierra Leone, in this country, it's an equivalent of leadership. Leadership. You know that thing, right? Eh? You know it. Yes, leadership, right? You know it. In other countries, it's chief, right? In Sierra Leone, it's after you, now you. After you, now you. It means before everyone else. It's you as the leader, it's you again, and then everybody else can come. So after you, now you, it's a pidgin way of saying, it's you, even after you. You don't have a deputy. The deputy is still you. That's how powerful as a leader you are. And they will revere and admire leadership, in particular political leadership. And if you pass around a Sierra Leonean and they say, after you, now you, you must know that you are bigger than big. You are bigger than you are the real thing. After you, now you. It means whoever comes as deputy or vice is number 3. It means the way you're so powerful, you occupy 2 spaces. After you, now you, Dr. Lekgotla. And now you must understand. So I was really fascinated by this expression of after you, now you. And I listened particularly to him. He said, oh, in South Africa, you don't have after you, now you. God, no, we don't have that. We don't have that. All I know is chief is leadership. He said, you guys are still there at the lower level. With us is after you, now you. It's a pigeon way of saying, after you, it's you again. So, and that kind of leadership centers around, not societies, not around us. It does not serve society, but individuals. And when you see it as well, you will see it expressed in the way when I live as a leader maybe of the Thabo Mbeki African School, and then Professor Buitendag takes over. He's going to erase everything that I had done. She's coming with her own programs now. Whatever we have been doing will all be in vain into the dustbin. There is no continuity. Right? These are the leaderships that serves individuals. Because it's not about the South African society. It's about now Professor Buitendag. She wants to be, she's going to say, what is my legacy? This legacy is Paswana's, as if Paswana was working for herself, right? So this was what Paswana was doing. I must come with my own legacy. I can't push Paswana's things. So when we are here, we are not pushing societal things, we are pushing our things. That's how we understand leadership here today. So these are some of the questions that we have to grapple with. How do we use diplomacy, dialogue, and collaboration to address conflicts on our continent? How do we ensure that Africa's young people inherit not only the memory of our history, but also the confidence and imagination to create a different future? It should not just be about admiration, about memory, but how do we use this to take us to the next level as a continent? These are questions that cannot be answered by one institution or one country alone. They require partnership across borders, across universities, across research institutions, and leadership platforms. We therefore see this engagement between the Thabo Mbeki African School and the SeMOSHOESHOE Institute for Peace and Leadership as an important opportunity to deepen intellectual and institutional collaboration between South Africa and Lesotho, and indeed across the African continent. Let me thank our colleagues from Lesotho for making the journey to be with us. It's not an easy one. They've been driving since yesterday, so they are here today. Your presence affirms the importance of regional intellectual partnerships and reminds us that our histories, struggles, and aspirations are deeply interconnected. I don't know, how do you see a difference between Mosotho wa Freistata le Mosotho wa ko Maseru? Le ba bona jwang hore ba fapana? Maybe there are specific features that na ke tsebe ke bona batho ba Maseru ba tshwana fela le ba Freistata, but lena batho ba Abahambe le a ba tseba. Re jwetse more ba fapana jwang re kgone ba bona ka gore na ke bone ba fapana. But our young people who are behind all this march and march, they can see the difference. Now I don't see the difference. I was telling them earlier in a meeting, the delegation from Lesotho, that when I was in London as a student, I was in a shop shopping and I heard Basotho speaking. And I just thought they are from South Africa. I ran to them. Batho ba ko gae. Then Harabuisan, it was South Africa, but Lesotho. It's because I can't see the difference. But we who have allowed the 1884 Berlin partitions to make us different, and you have embraced that difference, and you are also even defining yourselves in those differences. And that is why it is important that this type of partnership happens. You don't know where we're coming from. You don't know where we're coming from. Last week with Professor Ndlovu, we were in Zambia. And many of you don't know that South Africans left here in pre-colonial times to go and settle in Zambia, Malawi. How fitla go countering go banking go Zambia. Utola motwili Mr. Moses Ngwenya. How rikunjani bitwam? Agatsibile usizulu. Or I don't understand you. But you say this, or yes, I know my forefathers come from that side. But because I grew up in Zambia, I speak Bemba. These are our own people. Lerin Mabahab. During the struggle for national liberation, many of our people left here, exiled in Lesotho, in Botswana, in Swatini, in Mozambique, also in Zambia. A big house I went to belonged to O.R. Tambo. They gave it to O.R. Tambo, a double story. 100 soldiers were guarding O.R. Tambo because South African police were after him. The Zambia made sure that the Tambos and the camps of ANC, APLA, and all of this are secured. Their own national defense were looking after these people. That history is not known by many of our children. And that's why when they see Zambians, they feel they must go. Our own people, we were with them with Professor Ndlovu last week in Zambia, settled there because they married Zambian women when they were there in exile. They live with Zambians, they have children, they have houses there. So all that history is part of what the school needs to start doing this interconnection. Prof can see that now I'm getting into politics instead of opening remarks. I wish to thank our academics, our researchers, our students and partners who have made this seminar possible. And I encourage everyone participating today to engage openly, critically, and constructively. Let us challenge assumptions, listen to different perspectives, and above all, allow this conversation to generate ideas that extend beyond this seminar room. May today's engagement contribute to a leadership discourse that is authentically African, intellectually rigorous, and oriented towards the transformation of our continent. Once again, welcome to the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs. I wish you fruitful deliberations, meaningful exchanges, and the beginning of a partnership that will continue to grow. I thank you.
What shall I say? Not thank you, but wow. Let's give her another round of applause. I most sincerely hope that I'll be protected from what Professor Pashwana used me as a guinea pig example for being accused of building my own little empire. So may I be guarded against that and serve. As Professor Pashwana has emphasized so beautifully and so eloquently and with so much passion, this morning is a shared contribution and a shared undertaking. So now we have Professor SeMOSHOESHOE, who's going to speak this morning on behalf of the SeMOSHOESHOE Institute of Peace and Leadership, this seminar's partner institution. She's an associate professor at the National University of Lesotho and has led the institute since 2021. Before that, she taught at the Department of Development Studies, also at the National University of Lesotho. She holds a PhD in Development Studies from the University of the Witwatersrand, an MA in Development Studies from the Institute of Social Studies in The Hague, and a BA in Economics and Public Administration from the National University of Lesotho. She has also trained in peace and conflict management with the United Nations Institute for Training and Research and with the African Center for the Constructive Resolution of Disputes. She publishes on sustainable development, gender, international trade, governance, urbanization, and peace and conflict management. A combination that surely places her squarely and her work squarely on the ground this seminar seeks to cover. Professor Motshwene, please, you are most welcome. Join us at the podium.
Ke a le dumedisa. Dumelang. Kgotsong. If you can actually understand what I'm saying, but this is how Basotho greet everywhere they go. It's about peace, and you must also reciprocate by showing me that peace in the greeting. As it has been said, we come from the SeMOSHOESHOE, the first Institute of Peace and Leadership in the National University of Lesotho. And our mandate, and the only mandate, came as a result of lack of peace, leadership in crisis in Africa, in every corner of the world. Therefore, we carry that mandate using the iconic figure, the founder of the Basotho Nation. Him alone and others, in fact, later in the years, was an icon of peace. And he's known, at least in Southern Africa, in the Southern African region, that he maintained peace throughout, even in circumstances that could not render such to happen. This morning, I'm here tasked to give welcome remarks for this noble initiative taken by Thabo Mbeki African School of putting up a seminar while we were actually visiting the school and the university to engage on other aspects which we felt are critical as the institute and the university. Allow me to welcome you, our distinguished guests, honorable colleagues, our esteemed scholars who are in this room, and all participants who may not really be part of the Thabo Mbeki School, and also the UNISA family. It is with great honor and profound sense of purpose that I welcome you to this seminar on African Renaissance and SeMOSHOESHOE in the context of African leadership. Today, we gather not merely as academics or practitioners,
but as inheritors and stewards with indigenous knowledge, rich in African leadership heritage that continues to speak powerfully to our contemporary challenges. The concept of African Renaissance calls for nothing less than a re-engagement with indigenous knowledge and practices, a reclaiming of our own intellectual and moral resources to address the leadership challenges facing our continent. As scholars have noted, this Renaissance demands that we survey new understandings of leadership that emerge from African experiences and value systems, rather than relying exclusively on imported paradigms. The African Renaissance is not nostalgia for a romanticized past. It is a deliberate, critical recovery of indigenous thought forms as a solution to Africa's leadership problems. It asks us to develop culturally appropriate forms of leadership behavior that enhance our sense of self in community, generate shared understandings, and challenge repressive power relations. It is within this Renaissance spirit that we turn our attention to SeMOSHOESHOE, a recently developed philosophy propelled by the need to advance indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing to address our complex social challenges that cannot be addressed solely from foreign perspectives. SeMOSHOESHOE forms part of African world views and means of relating to the world, rooted in the exemplary life and leadership of Morena Moshoeshoe, the founder and the first paramount chief of the Basotho Nation. SeMOSHOESHOE does not have one fixed definition. Rather, it embodies a constellation of leadership virtues that Morena Moshoeshoe demonstrated throughout his remarkable career as a leader in the African context. The question we must ask ourselves now, even today as we are gathered here in this hall, is, what does Morena Moshoeshoe teach us about leadership in the 21st century? In an era where globalization and its challenges are increasingly interconnected and complex. Any answer from this room to the question? Unfortunately, I was a lecturer. Any answer in this room? Morena Moshoeshoe's pillars or principles include, but are not limited to, the deep and genuine love for one's nation as the fundamental element of good leadership, This is the first tenet of SeMOSHOESHOE. That any leader must first love one of his own. So this means leadership is love at heart of your own people. Magnanimity, forgiveness, and reconciliation. Qualities that distinguish Morena Moshoeshoe from many contemporaries during the turbulent period of Difaqani. The values of peace, ubuntu, and service. That we should recognize that leadership exists for the community, not the community for leadership. Tolerance, dissenting views, and making people feel part of the decisions. He was not exclusionary. Accommodating diversity and respecting people's differences while staying close to one's constituency. Our executive dean asked how many of us here can distinguish between South African Sotho and Basotho from Lesotho. I stand here, I don't see any difference. Accommodating diversity. Embracing modernization without losing cultural grounding. Morena Moshoeshoe was not afraid of change, but understood the importance of adapting to new realities. At once upon a time, he also interacted with the British, all people who were actually new in the phenomenon where they lived with his people. So, the virtues which I have just read are an embodiment of SeMOSHOESHOE, and they offer a compelling alternative to leadership models that have failed to deliver sustainable development and social cohesion across our continent. Therefore, SeMOSHOESHOE reminds us that instability is an enemy of progress and growth. Good leadership requires reliable intelligence, sound information. Servant leadership and ethical behavior must reshape the mindset of every leader. And according to me, all who are in this room today are all leaders. I don't see anyone who is not a leader at this point in time. It's all about how you navigate your leadership. Let this, as the SeMOSHOESHOE Institute of Peace and Leadership, we have already pioneered the National SeMOSHOESHOE Renaissance campaign, which mirrors the SeMOSHOESHOE framework objectives to revive these virtues that I have talked about, which I said the list is endless, but I only picked those that are talking to our hearts for this seminar. I would therefore request all of us in this seminar to contribute meaningfully to this seminar, because through your contributions, we shall be able to work through the tensions between the dominant leadership paradigms and the indigenous alternatives. And where we can generate insights relevant not just to the leadership in Africa, but to the leadership studies globally. In closing, in the spirit of SeMOSHOESHOE itself, characterized by tolerance, dialogue, and the enhancement of self in community, I invite each one of you to participate fully, to share your experiences and perspectives, and to challenge us all to think more deeply about what African leadership can and should be in this new century. May our deliberations be fruitful, our insights transformative, and our commitment to African Renaissance through indigenous leadership wisdom be unwavering. Thank you. Ke a le amohela. Welcome. Ke a leboha.
Professor Motshwane, thank you so much for challenging us, for challenging the leader in each and every one to take mutual responsibility and to really live what is what we know as the Ubuntu culture. Give her another round of applause, please. Now, some of you may have received the non-revised program. We have a slight revision in our program because before we come to our keynote, it is important that we ground the theme of this conversation and this seminar, and we turn to a historian to assist us with that. Professor Sifiso Ndlovu sets the scene for us this morning. He is an NRF-rated full professor at UNISA, where he serves as acting director of the TM School's Research and Knowledge Hub. He holds a doctorate from the University of Witwatersrand and has worked at the University of Natal, Vista University, and the Human Sciences Research Council, the National Research Foundation, and the Africa Institute of South Africa. He is editor-in-chief of The Road to Democracy in South Africa, the multi-volume history published under the South African Democracy Education Trust. He also edited ANC Today Letters, The Ideas and Thoughts of President Thabo Mbeki, and has written on public violence in South Africa in the first half of the 20th century. He works with both the Thabo Mbeki Foundation and UNISA. He currently chairs the ministerial task team of the Department of Basic Education, which is reviewing the school history curriculum, which is to say that the question of how we tell our own story is, for him, not an abstract, but a reality. So, Professor Ndlovu, please give us the background to this morning's discussion.
Good morning and thank you, colleagues. I would like to start with the fact that this is not a new relationship. We are not starting from zero. The relationship goes back to 16 years ago, where the founder of the SeMOSHOESHOE Institute of Peace and Leadership was working with me at SADET. As you have heard, that SADET is part and parcel of the Thabo Mbeki School programs. Professor Tefetso Motibe was representing colleagues from Lesotho when we needed an author in one of our volumes on African Solidarity. That is volume 5 of our book. So he wrote a chapter, he conducted research on the role of Lesotho in the struggle for national liberation in South Africa. So I worked with him for a period of about 5 to 6 years. And by the time he founded the school, the institute at the National University of Lesotho, we had already set up the relationship. And also with Professor Motswane, we also worked together in UNESCO projects. And therefore, this is a relationship that is not going to fail. So we welcome them. We welcome them because they belong to us. I would also like to say that when I heard you saying Khotsong, you reminded me of the day when I came across an article in the African Communist, which was about peace and security. And the opening page of that article was just analyzing academically why Basotho, when they greet, they say peace in you, Khotsong. And I was taken aback that the authors will spend a page just explaining that. You know, I thought really you can't talk about African Renaissance if you can't even explain that greeting in terms of Basotho. You know, they use the word and the concept peace. And that was quite an interesting article for me to read. And also, as it was said here, I'm supposed to provide the context of our seminar today. How many of you know that when the ANC was founded in 1912? Because I'm going to title my presentation, Diplomacy, Solidarity, and a United Front between Basotho and South Africans in the early 20th century. This goes back to around 1908. But by the time, so it's going to be a history lesson. So you're welcome. If we're up and running as an institute, besides beginning in pre-colonial times with oral traditions, this was probably going to be the second lecture, which dates back to the early 20th century. Because I'm not sure that most of you are aware of the fact that the present South African government structure of having cabinet proper and the House of Traditional Leadership goes back to 1912 when the ANC, as the South African National Native Congress, was founded. Most of you are not aware of the fact that a two-tier system was developed then. The first one was the House of Chiefs, and then the second system was a proper structure made up of politicians. I'm sure you're going to be surprised that the honorary president in terms of leadership of the House of Chiefs was King Letsie II of Basotho. Therefore, it seems that it's high time we should know that our movement, when it was founded, it was Pan-Africanist in approach. That is why one of its leaders is from Basotho. And I'm going to explain to you in a historical narrative how this came about. And therefore, it seems as if historical consciousness has evaporated amongst us, so because that's a historical fact that we can't erase. Because what happened when that August body was formed? There were various monarchies from Southern Africa. That's a precursor of what we call SADC now. There were kings and chiefs from Bechuanaland, that's Botswana, Swaziland, Basutoland, that's Lesotho, even Zambia. Zambia was represented by King Lwanika of the Barotes. Who are the Barotes? They still exist today, and their present king is also called, I think, Lwanika IV. The Barotes are South Africans in diaspora. We have South Africans in diaspora. They left the Orange Free State in the 19th century and settled in Zambia. They live in an area called Barotseland, or what we called Abalus. They still exist even today. I'm not sure when they're here and you say to them, Abahambe, what do you mean? Because we have South Africans in diaspora in Southern Africa. So they were part of that meeting that took this decision, and they were as chiefs and monarchs, and they were part of the leadership. It all began in 1908, because although Lesotho is landlocked and completely surrounded by and economically dependent on South Africa, this did not prevent Basotho from supporting the struggle for liberation in South Africa. Together with Africans in South Africa, they resisted white domination. Basotho participated through their monarchy in the formation of the South African Native National Congress in 1912. And from the 1950s onwards, Basotho provided political and educational refugee, as well as financial, diplomatic, and military support to South Africans fleeing oppression in South Africa. But what happened in terms of this relationship? At the end of the South African War in 1902, some of you still prefer to use the Anglo-Boer War as a term. The process of unifying the two white races in South Africa, that is the Boers and the Afrikaners, took effect. And what transpired after that was that these two races, they raised an issue that they called the native problem. So it means, as far as they are concerned, they're going to form a unified state that is going to encompass the two English provinces, Natal and the Cape, and also the Boer Republic of the Free State and of the Transvaal here. And Britain, as the colonial power, was going to provide the legislation that is known the South Africa Act of 1909, which is our first constitution, which simply stated that Africans as natives, they are a problem. They are not going to be part of this constitution. They are going to be outside the discussion. That is why when the white races met in 1908, our people decided also to come up with their own convention, because it was clear that in 1910, the Union of South Africa, or maybe I call it the Union of White South Africa, was going to be established. What did this entail? Before it was formed, there was a clause that is called Section 51 of the Schedule of the South African Act of 1908, which provided the incorporation of the British Protectorate of Basutoland, Bechuanaland, and Swaziland into the Union of South Africa. And also it did also proclaim that what was then called Northern Rhodesia and Southern Rhodesia could become part of South Africa. So whatever happened, the original idea of the formation of the Union of South Africa was going to incorporate Malawi, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Swaziland, Lesotho, and Botswana. That is when, therefore, all those countries, all the people, the African people from those countries, decided that they are going to join forces with the oppressed Africans in South Africa. That is why, therefore, from 1908 to 1909, they found themselves sharing the table with the ANC, what we know as the ANC today, to form the South African National Native Congress. So that is why the first elected leaders then included Southern Africans. That is how then Basutoland King Lietzi II became the president of the House of Traditional Leaders, but then it was called the House of Chiefs. That is why when the ANC came into power in 1994, they revived that structure. They revived that structure, paying homage to the fact that it was a Pan-Africanist idea that led to the formation of the liberation movement. So I'll conclude my talk because I don't want to take anything away from the main speaker by saying that those ties still bind us as Southern Africans, regardless what March and March says, because I'm of the view that they need a dose of this historical lesson for them to say to them, away with a lack of understanding of the past, that we are one, that we belong to the Southern African region. And there are so many leaders from Lesotho I can mention here who played a role during the first meeting. I mean, it's Philip Muchekwane and also Josiah Smodisa and the other brothers. Because what they did during the meeting, they were chairing different panels. It was not only reserved to Seme or John Dube and all the South African leaders. They played a role in terms of chairing different panels that will lead to the final decision. And the final decision was shared. So this relationship, therefore, is cast in stone and goes back to the beginning of the 20th century. So if we fail in this relationship, we would have failed our ancestors. But thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Prof. Ndlovu, for reminding us how important it is to know and understand our past so that we can appreciate today, so that together we can build a tomorrow. Now we turn to our keynote speaker. I want to put it out there that our keynote speaker this morning brings together both themes of our seminar in a single career. Quite extraordinary. Dr. Pali Lahotla is the former Statistician General of South Africa, a numbers guy, yes. A position he held from 2000 up to 2017. He was co-chair of Paris 21 and was the chair of the United Nations Statistics Commission. He was the founding chair of the Statistics Commission of South Africa and chaired the African Symposium for Statistical Development. All of these important for us to remember the past. Let me, as a joint appreciator of statistics, share that love and acknowledge it. He was the vice president of the International Statistics Institute. He served as one of the 25-member panel on data revolution appointed by the UN Secretary General. Since 2018, he became a research associate at Oxford University, a professor of practice at the University of Johannesburg, an ambassador of the Oxford Poverty Human Development Initiative, a founder of an integrated multi-layered Lahotla ledger systems, design instruments that are based on the Lenaka Lamoshlomi. We are honored to welcome you. Share my appreciation in welcoming Dr. Lahotla.
Thank you very much. I wonder where that water comes from. This one. From the highland. Thank you very much, Professor Paswane, in absentia. And my sister from Lesotho. When we say Hohle, Lesotho Hohle. That's what that means. I have my colleague here. Mujale Famef, he's around here. You'll mix with him. But Prof. Ndlovu, thank you very much for laying the foundation. Many seem to like to forget that there's a place called Ngodilwe. And Ngodilwe is the place where Mohlomi had an institute of learning. That's where Skukuni land, and that's where Mohloeshwe land. It's in the Caledon. The Mohloeshwe Institute is a remarkable movement forward. But before I start, I have to greet, because when Lesotho is here, I have to recognize the Basotho king, Letsie Labrar. You talked about Letsie, the first one. I have to talk about Letsie Labrar, who is the king of the Basotho. And whenever Basotho meet, they are obliged to pay homage to that king. Lesotho is my home, born and bred, molded and taught. That is my source of intellect. Ghana is my intellectual home, where my intellectual profession was sharpened. And South Africa is my home of intellectual practice, and Africa is my oyster. Africa is home to Africans. SeMOSHOESHOE says, "Hohle ke Lesotho hohle," and the message is reciprocal for every country. The statecraft of Morena MOSHOESHOE the first, the martial valor of his warrior sons, and the philosophical bedrock of nation building, perhaps is a befitting tribute to his life. A rare legacy a nation can have, but a legacy to be shared, especially as the world faces tumult. Many cannot point where Lesotho is. Perhaps it is because it is one which no one knows about, or because so much of its territory has been stolen. Be that as it may, Morena Mohlomi, the mentor of Morena MOSHOESHOE, gifted the world the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and much more. Morena Mohlomi, the planter, and Morena MOSHOESHOE, whose name after circumcision is Letlama, the binder, projected to the world the founding principles of SDGs in practice. Morena Mohlomi allocated to MOSHOESHOE 5 principles. First, know yourself and know those you lead. Second, mobilize stakeholders to productive outcomes. Third, use new instruments of power. Fourth, guarantee intergenerational value creation. And finally, undertake all these noble tasks through integrated reporting. Morena MOSHOESHOE on these principles lived to leave no one behind. SeMOSHOESHOE is an ideal that Morena MOSHOESHOE did not only idealize, but lived by. For anyone who knows not Lesotho or West Hill, volunteers others to be ignorant about it, has a lot of schooling to undertake. So the President of the United States, Mr. Trump, is invited to join this lecture to learn, know and understand what this Lesotho king gifted to the world, what the planter and the binder meant for meaningful and examination of life in its totality. An unexamined life is a useless life. How his practice and the ethics he lived by are so sorely needed today. He is relevant to the making of Africa. How his practice and the ethics he lived by are so sorely, the intelligentsia are less complete until they have studied Mohlomi and MOSHOESHOE. Max Dupree has given the world a view on Mohlomi, the sage of the Caledon, he called him, in his well-researched book. I do not pretend to give the world a view on Morena MOSHOESHOE in a lecture of 40 minutes, but a glimpse of his philosophy is profoundly essential where we are as South Africa and its twin Lesotho, where Masilo will remain forever being asked about of the heart of his twin brother, Masilonya. They were of equal build and birth, Lesotho and South Africa, but once the heart was extracted, the bird keeps singing about the heart of Masilonya to Masilo and the world. The question relevant today is about where the heart of Africa relative to the world lives. The epistemological matrix of SeMOSHOESHOE. To stand before an audience and speak of statecraft in Africa is too often to rehearse catalogue of borrowed paradigms. We look to Westphalian models of absolute sovereignty, Roman Dutch constructs of alienable property, and adversarial common law mechanisms of punitive justice. Yet, nested within the mountainous spine of Southern Africa, forged in the cataclysmic furnace of the 19th century Fakani, lies a complete self-contained and profoundly sophisticated philosophy of governance, SeMOSHOESHOE. SeMOSHOESHOE is not an antiquity to be relegated to museum cabinets or recited solely as nostalgic folklore. It constitutes an integrated constitutional architecture an economic doctrine of human capital preservation, a spatial jurisprudence of fluid commons, and an asymmetric diplomatic doctrine of non-hegemonic survival. When Morena Moshoeshoe one assembled the fragment of shattered communities upon the shadow sandstone plateau of Tababusu in 1824, he did not merely construct a mountain stronghold, he codified an epistemological revolution. The foundational matrix of this statecraft rests upon four non-negotiable pillars that govern the relationship between the sovereign, the citizen, the land, and the adversary. The first pillar is the personification and revelation of peace as an inviolable familial covenant. Familial covenant. That's what Moshoeshoe said. Peace is my sister. So when peace is your sister, how can you violate her? In classical Sesotho thought, peace is neither a tactical surrender nor a passive pause between wars. It is elevated to the status of an uterine sister, demanding unconditional protection, continuous devotion, and sovereign defense. To make peace your sister means that diplomacy and reconciliation are not secondary concessions. They are the primary supreme instruments of sovereignty statehood. The second pillar is the moral inviolability of human life, crystallized in the instruction of the philosopher Sage Muranamhu. A human being is dirty. Human life must never be destroyed. This principle established that the legitimacy of power is measured strictly by its capacity to preserve, nourish, and rehabilitate human beings. A ruler who executes subjects, starves communities, or rules by terror cannibalizes the very demographic foundation of the state. The third pillar is the jurisprudence of uninhibited deliberative candor. At the assembly, the fat is not skimmed off the broth. In literal practice, the rich, nourishing fat floating upon the meat broth served at court is consumed hot and whole. Figuratively, no truth brought before the public assembly may be filtered, diluted, sanitized, or censored to appease the delicate sensibilities of the powerful. A leader who governs through sycophancy and filtered counsel invites systemic collapse. This radical transparency is permanently anchored by the procedural immunity of the citizen. He who stumbles or errs in speech before the council cannot be prosecuted or silenced. The fourth pillar is the economic technology of productive redistribution through the Mafisa system. In the wake of regional devastation, Moshoeshoe understood that formal political freedom without productive capital is an illusion. Through Mafisa, the royal court lent breeding cattle, grain, and land rights to displaced refugees, impoverished subjects, and conquered adversaries. The cattle remained the property of the trust, but the milk, the draft power, the manure, and the portion of the offspring remained with the household. In a single economic stroke, the destitute were converted into self-sustaining agrarian stakeholders, welding hundreds of disparate clans into a united, resilient commonwealth. Milton Friedman's celebrated shareholder value that has decimated Africa through its vassals of the IMF and the World Bank would be put to shame if he held counsel before Morena Moshoeshoe. The virtues of SeMOSHOESHOE: peace, loyalty, forgiveness, companionship, and generosity. The systemic resilience of the Basotho nation was engineered through severe core ethical virtues, each operating as an institutional mechanism rather than an abstract sentiment. Peace served as the ohozo, served as the master asset. It was deployed not when the state was weak, but at the apex of military victory. When the British Empire Imperial Punitive Expedition under General George Cathcart was outmaneuvered and bloodied at the Battle of Berea on the 20th of December 1852, SeMOSHOESHOE did not unleash his mounted cavalry to annihilate the retreating columns on the open plains. Instead, he dedicated a midnight truce from the heights of Tababisiu, framing the battle as a sufficient demonstration of British power. By offering an honorable exit to an imperial superpower, SeMOSHOESHOE preserved the territorial borders of his people and neutralized the threat of an all-out war of imperial retribution. Loyalty, Butsepe, was cultivated through horizontal peer solidarity. Men assist one another in fastening the loincloth. The tseya is the traditional garment of labor and war. Securing it in moments of crisis requires a trusted comrade. The maxim established that collective survival depends upon mutual vulnerability, shared risk, and brotherhood across lineages. Forgiveness, tshwarelo, and magnanimity were operationalized to rebuild the social fabric. In July 1824, during the harrowing winter trek from Botabute to Tababisiu, the rear guard was ambushed at the Petu Pass by starving cannibals clan led by Rakotswana, SeMOSHOESHOE's own grandfather. SeMOSHOESHOE's own grandfather, Pete, was captured and consumed. When Rakotswana and his followers were subsequently captured and brought before the Lokgotla, the senior chiefs and warrior councils clamored for their immediate execution and torture. SeMOSHOESHOE refused. He stood before the council and declared that one does not desecrate the living sepulchres of one's ancestors. He subjected the cannibals to purification rituals, provided them with mafisa cattle, granted them fertile arable land, and integrated them into the productive life of the nation. By choosing restorative justice over retributive execution, he converted outcasts into agrarian citizens, extinguishing cannibalism across the high veld, not through the spear, but through the restorative power of cattle and grain. Companionship and collective responsibility were forged within the age regiments MEPAD, where princes and the commoners endured the trials of initiation together, creating unbreakable bonds of regiment trust that anchored battlefield maneuvers. Development, Khodiso, was pursued through rapid technological adaptation. Within 2 decades, the Basotho transformed themselves from foot soldiers armed with throwing spears into formidable mounted riflemen, while adopting the ox-drawn plow to turn the Caledon River basin into the undisputed agricultural granary of the southern Highveld. Indeed, SeMOSHOESHOE heeded his mantra of create new instruments of power. Generosity and magnanimity reached their zenith in 1831 during the siege of Tababisiu by King Mzilikazi's elite Matabele regiments. After repelling successive frontal assaults from the cliffs, using sandstone boulders and throwing spears, the Basotho observed the Matabele forces breaking camp in logistical exhaustion and impending starvation. Rather than pursuing and slaughtering the retreating warriors, SeMOSHOESHOE dispatched prime-fed slaughtered cattle under royal emissaries with the legendary message. The legendary message said, SeMOSHOESHOE salutes you, Msilikatsi. Supposing that hunger brought you to this mountain, he sends you this cattle to eat on your way home, lest you perish on the road. The Matabele commanders, overwhelmed by this display of sovereign strength and compassion, accepted the cattle, slaughtered them for sustenance, and pledged never to attack Tababisiu again, a non-aggression covenant that held to the remainder of Mzilikazi's reign. The strategic philosophy, the Taumesana paradigm. Central to SeMOSHOESHOE's military doctrine was the profound aphorism, Taumesana, Yare, Hadiradietsa Diposo, Uskiwadi Sitisa. When your adversaries are actively compounding their own errors and engineering their own logistics logistical destruction, do not interrupt them. This doctrine of strategic patience recognizes that aggressive powers are frequently blinded by hubris, racial superiority, and logistical overreach. During the first Free State Basotho War of 1858, known as Ntoya Senegal, the Boer commanders advanced deep into the Caledon lowlands, burning mission stations including Beersheba and destroying Basotho grain stores. Rather than committing his main army to catastrophic frontal clash on the plains, Moshoeshoe withdrew his forces to the impenetrable citadel of Tababsiu. While the Boer commandos exhausted their ammunition, rations, and horses attempting to breach the sandstone cliffs, Moshoeshoe unleashed his agile mounted cavalry units behind enemy lines. The Basotho horsemen swept across the undefended farms of the Orange Free State, capturing livestock and cutting supply corridors. When the Boer commandants realized their home bases were exposed and their siege at Tababsiu had failed, their commandos disintegrated in panic, forcing President Boshoff to sue for immediate British mediation. Moshoeshoe let the adversaries exhaust his momentum against stone before dismantling his rear. The geopolitical equilibria, alliances with Shaka and Silicath. Surrounded by the military behemoth during the height of the Difatani, Moshoeshoe demonstrated masterly diplomatic agility by constructing dynamic tributary and non-aggressive pact. Recognizing that devastating power of the expanding Zulu kingdom under King Shaka Kasegzakakona, Moshoeshoe initiated a proactive diplomatic channel. He dispatched regular royal emissaries across the Drakensberg escarpment, bearing precious ecological tribute, ostrich plumes, blue crane feathers, and prime otter skins, which were essential for the royal headdresses and regalia of Shaka's elite regiments. By acknowledging Shaka's regional primacy through high-value gifts, Moshoeshoe secured Lesotho Eastern perimeter. The tribute established a recognition of mutual sovereign respect, ensuring that Zulu impis bypassed the Caledon River Basin while providing the Yamba Sotho polity with the spatial breathing room required to consolidate its interior defense. Similarly, the cattle diplomacy extended to King Mzilikazi in 1831 transformed a mortal threat into a durable border equilibrium. Moshoeshoe understood that brute force creates only temporary truces, whereas acts of sovereign magnanimity that preserve the dignity of the adversary forge enduring geopolitical peace. Restorative jurisprudence, the trial and clemency of Mukaila. The trial and pardon of Mukaila stand as one of the definitive legal precedents and demonstrations of restorative magnanimity in the court of Morena Moshoeshoe, the first at Tababsiu. The gravity of the transaction, in 19th century customary jurisprudence, violating the royal household, including Morena, or committing indiscretions involving the queens, was treated not merely as adultery, but as high treason and direct assault on the sanctity of the monarch. Customary law routinely prescribed capital punishment, total asset confiscation, or permanent exile. The demands of the assembly, when Mukaila, a prominent warrior and relative within the royal sphere, was brought before the Lokotla, senior chiefs and councillors forcefully demanded his execution. They argued that anything less than the death penalty would undermine royal authority and invite lawlessness. Moshoeshoe's magnanimous jurisprudence, guided by the teachings of the sage Morena Moshomi that human life is sacred, Moshoeshoe refused to impose the death penalty. He reasoned with counsel. He said, Mukaila is a brave warrior and a pillar in the defense of a mountain. If I kill him, what do I gain? The nation loses a shield, and death produces only death. What about the restorative sentence? Rather than retributive execution, Moshoeshoe imposed a substantial fine in cattle to compensate for the violation and cleanse the transgression. Mukaida's life, family, and military rank were fully preserved. Strategic outcomes. Mukaila remained fiercely devoted to the crown and served as a stalwart commander in subsequent defensive campaigns, validating Moshoeshoe's governing philosophy that restorative justice and royal magnanimity secures loyalty far more effectively than the terror of the spear. The warrior ethos, sons leading from the front, a non-negotiable tenet of Basotho's statecraft that was that political legitimacy required frontline physical courage. A leader is one who marches with the regiments. The sons and grandsons of Moshoeshoe were not pampered nobility residing safe near garrisons. They were operational battlefield generals who led charges, scaled cliffs, and absorbed gunfire alongside their warriors. The oral praise archives that the Togotsamar and Abasu Abdelahali record their military feats across the 19th century frontier wars. Murana Masupa celebrated as Sulanya. Sulanya Takaradimking, Ulan Tagotsamara, Ayokan Moshoeshoe. Takaradimking was the third son of Moshoeshoe, Great House and the Iron Commander of the Lion and Makwarop Regiment. During the Treaty in 1865, when Orange Free State Commandant Louis Wepner led a massive assault on the Kubedu Pass at Tarabisiu, it was Masupa who orchestrated the cliff-top defense, crushing the assault and killing Wepner in the breach. During the gun war in 1880 to 1881, when the Cape Colony attempted total disarmament under the Peace Preservation Act, Masupa stood unyielding. Masupa period and the Togotsamaro. From Melamba Masupa, Uhulan Pagatakotsamra. Masupa, the hyena that feasts on the rocky ridges, who charges into the thick of battle, digging his rear hooves into the turf and refusing to surrender the farmlands of his ancestors. Oh, I see. Okay, no. The VC is here, and she says she wants to ululate, and she needs to be given the chance to ululate alone. Then you make it out every year. That's a half time.
Thank you for that. Let me please ask you to welcome our Honorable Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Lenkabula, and who is joined by our Vice Principal for Institutional Advancement, Professor Magano. Professor Lenkabula, will you please give us...
Colleagues, good morning, Khotong. Yes. There's a new culture of halftime and commercial projects. You've seen it if you're watching soccer. We don't do it in the academy. I really regret that we had to do it. But because Ntate Dr. Badilu Hotla, not just as a statistician, knows very well my maternal family. Like he studied with them, he knows them very well, so I could make that request. I'm here with Professor Mahano. Prof, may I please introduce you? Colleagues, can you give him a round of applause? We're here to extend our gratitude and to offer a message of appreciation for the partnership that the National University of Lesotho and UNISA are undertaking, and as well to pay gratitude to Ntate Lehotla for enunciating this concept, SeMOSHOESHOE, as the key theme of our deliberations. I have had the opportunity to listen to Ntate Lekgotla, and Dean, thank you very much for allowing us to pass a message, Professor Paswan. I was listening to Ntate Lekgotla, but before he finishes and before the interlocutors ask the question, I'll be the first to start. Ntate Lekgotla, I hear you speaking about Morena Moshweshwe, Morena Mohlomi, Ntate Moholo Pete, and everybody. And then I was wondering, what happened to the women who also ensured that in that epoch, in that period, the historiography of South Africa and Lesotho enjoined and had a dialogue in itself. So I happen to be a granddaughter, a great-great-great-granddaughter from my maternal side of Nkgono Mantatisi. He knows. And Nkgono Mantatisi and Morena Moshweshwe were born around the same time. Nkgono Mantatisi, a little earlier than Morena Moshweshwe, 1786 for Ntate Moshweshwe, Morena Moshweshwe, and 1784 for Nkgono Mantatisi. Both were central to creating new modalities of leadership, of diplomacy, of protecting nationhood or statehood, of bringing historical value and connecting people. Both had strategic military strategies that protected their citizens here in South Africa, but also in Lesotho. Both lived within a period where in Europe they were contesting colonialism. At a time when that French despot, what was his name? Napoleon Bonaparte, was busy projecting and promoting violence and against black people. If you remember the Haitian Revolution, that was the time when Moshweshwe and Nkgono Mantatisi were fighting to build societies, to create cohesion, to contest violence, to participate in statecraft. And I think, therefore, SeMOSHOESHOE will not be complete if a dialogue, this interlocution with the feminist or womanist or Bosadi theorization of drawing on the strengths and the lessons from Nkgono Mantatisi, who consistently interfaced, interacted, pushed back, and sometimes called Moshweshwe as an ally. I think we can benefit, Ntate Lekgotla and all of you colleagues, if we can also hold them in conversation, in tension, but also in scholarship that enables us to draw from all the leaders who envisioned strong societies with social capital, social cohesion. Our intellectual and scholarship will be strengthened if we look at these multiplicities. And therefore, I hope to engage in a response and a dialogue with Ntate Lekgotla so that SeMOSHOESHOE does not leave out Nkgono Mantatisi, Nkgono Mantsupa, and all other women that were central to the founding of strong nations that we are the descendants of. Welcome to UNISA, the home of leaders, the university committed to shaping futures. I'm grateful to the TM School for the work that you're doing. And even my favorite prof, he's happy because he has a friend from Lesotho. TM School is benefiting from, this duality and the twin project of Masilo Lebasilonian or Mantatisi SeMOSHOESHOE. And I hope UNISA and NUL will benefit from both. I'm both an alumnus of UNISA and of NUL, and it's an honor to see this partnership flourishing. Thank you very much. I wish you the best deliberation, and thank you for the half-time.
Thank you very much, BC. I know you send me flowers, and I'm now Professor Extraordinaire. here at UNISA.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, Professor Mahanu is the Vice Principal responsible for institutional advancement, the people here at UNISA, UNISA Foundation, as well as all communications, marketing, eventing at the University of South Africa. He's also, people. We don't say HR anymore. Thank you, Prof. HR, for those who are used to that terminology. But one of the critical things, if you don't want to forget him, you can see he looks like Mandela or President Mbeki. It's not me, it's all the visitors to UNISA that says that. He's a statesman and a strong intellectual in microbiology, especially the discipline of parasitology. And it's a great honor for me to be coming here to extend a message of support and a message of appreciation on behalf of UNISA. And if you see us leaving, please forgive us. We have other meetings. We would have wanted to prioritize this and hear our statistician reflecting not on numbers, but on discourse and discourse analysis. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Prof. Makano, thank you very much. Thank you, VC, for gracing this moment. And then I am emboldened at halftime to go to the second round. Mantatisi, the warrior, is the cause why SeMOSHOESHOE left Tababusi, Tabotabote to Tababusi, because the Tokwa were very fierce. And SeMOSHOESHOE felt that Musesane, she was called, she's a problem. But then they formed a very strong alliance later in life. I was talking about Super the hyena that feasts on the rocky ridges, who charges into the thick of battle, digging his rear hooves into the turf and refusing to surrender the firearm of his ancestors. They used to call him Mufitlamedi, Mufitlamedi Wamatis, Ufitlamedi Makaguamusel, Barakajan Lena who chose him a party, Somotu Mamakao Manyani. He didn't have big buttocks. They even saw it at birth. Now, Murana Rotori, the grandson of SeMOSHOESHOE and son of Litsie, the first Litsie, who was at the Free State meeting, but he sent his son, the Rotori, to be part of in the Free State during the establishment of the ANC. His praise songs were Tautse Flamunyan wal Rotori Wasilala, Wamabefula, Murana Udisabele. Murano uhlopasadi hali uhlopasadi habole marahosi dihabole kebala sama the one. When he was praised, hunotu lumola hodu le ahlaba le hlaba motoloto asitu yema aitshogelle ka sefate matla. During the war in Mohlanape, mono ba kwa upepetswa thutenya upepetsa Maria Matsu, Amutapo Aflo, Anato, no more like so move. I can't Kapalbe Mumeti and Zanuka. I got Fishare, Elichers and Tui. Now the blood left and went to Cape Town to go and report that they have fled from war. This man was dying. That's how Lurotori places were. They were from Matebe to Tenya Pepeta, Mohubagwang Mahua Bahad. Iserabapala Mutwa, Irapalaza Mufawa Mufeta. At the decisive battleground of Matebe and Calaban in 1880, Lurotori's mounted cavalry outmaneuvered the artillery and cavalry of the Cape forces, routing the colonial army, forcing the political bankruptcy of Prime Minister Gordon Sprigg administration, and compelling the British Crown to grant Basutoland separate status in 1884. Murana Mama celebrated as the Hugua Chwana Lasanati Mama, la dumelang ka modisa pereng. La mo jala fatshe le dikokwana. Commanded the lightning cavalry sweeps that disrupted colonial infantry lines. The great whirlwind, which translates into the great whirlwind of the house of Senate, who roared across the plains, plucking the enemy scout straight from his saddle and casting him into the earth. The clash of property regime, that is communal usufruct and cadastral enclosure. The protracted 19th century conflicts across the Caledon River Basin were fundamentally a structural collision between two irreconcilable conceptions of space, law, and resources. Pre-colonial Africa land tenure was rooted in an inalienable usufructuary trust. Land could neither be bought, sold, nor permanently alienated. The sovereign, which held the land in sacred custody of living, diseased, and unborn generations. Space was defined by porous ecological corridors, natural river systems, mountain salients, and the seasonal migration of livestock, Miraka, between sweet-felt lowlands and sour-felt mountain pastures. Resource rights were multi-layered, and they consisted of the household-held exclusive rights to cultivate grain in summer, but post-harvest, the same field reverted to open communal grazing for all village heads. European settler statecraft operated on freehold alienability under Roman, Dutch, and English common law. Land was an exclusive commercial commodity surveyed onto paper deed registries and bounded by straight-line grids, stone beacons, and wired fencing. Colonialism weaponized the cadastral survey. When SeMOSHOESHOE granted grazing permits or settlement rights to early Boers and missionaries, he acted under customary usufruct, expecting tribute and recognizing sovereignty custody. Settlers systematically misinterpreted hospitality as permanent freehold purchase. Through boundary commissions like the Warring Line of 1849 and the catastrophic Treaty of Allual North in 1869, colonial surveyors drew mathematical lines that excised more than 50% of prime arable land from the Basotho nation. Long-established villages were converted overnight into illegal squatters on paper. Fences severed transhumance routes, confining dense populations and cattle herds to erodible mountain slopes, teetering rapid ecological degradation and soil erosion. What about the political economy of dispossession? Granary to labor reserve. The modern economic distress of South Africa's peripheries is the consequence of an engineered economic inversion. In the 1850s, 1860s, and 1870s, the Basotho operated the undisputed agricultural breadbasket of the Highveld. Following the discovery of diamonds in Kimberley in 1867, Basotho farmers adopted the ox wagon plow, supplying hundreds of thousands of bags of wheat, maize, and sorghum via wagon convoys. The agrarian efficiency completely outperformed white settler farming across the Free State and the Cape Colony. To dismantle this African agrarian competition and manufacture an elastic labor supply for the deep-level gold mines of the Witwatersrand, colonial administrations deployed structural coercion. First, the loss of Nahaya under the 1869 Allual North Treaty stripped the nation of its fertile Trans-Caledon lowlands, causing the ratio of arable land per household to collapse. Second, colonial authorities imposed protectionist grain tariffs and built coastal railways directly to the mining centers, flooding the market with cheap American and Australian grain and pricing Basotho produce out of the market. Third, British administrations instituted cash-denominated hut and poll taxes, making the sale of bodily labor on the Witwatersrand the sole legal method to obtain British sterling. Fourth, The Chamber of Mines established a recruitment monopoly through Wenela, the Native Recruiting Corporation, and Teba, turning Lesotho into a spatial labor enclave. By the 1970s, over 120,000 to 150,000 Basotho men, accounting for nearly 50% of the active adult male labor force, were absent on oscillating mining contracts. Under the Deferred Pay Act of 1974, 60 to 90% of basic miner wages were compulsorily withheld and wired directly in bulk to the Lesotho Bank in Maseru. While this massive capital pool underwrote state liquidity and national infrastructure, it locked rural communities into deep remittance dependency, shifted the entire burden of agricultural and domestic labor onto women, and devastated rural agrarian productivity. The cross-border occupational restitution, silicosis, SeMOSHOESHOE, and the Odimois reform. The structural debt of mineral extraction remains unpaid. For over a century, hundreds of thousands of Basotho mine workers inhaled crystalline silica dust in ultra-deep shafts, contracting irreversible silicosis and occupational pulmonary tuberculosis. When incapacitated, these men were discharged with nominal payouts and sent home, externalizing the terminal health care and palliative costs directly onto impoverished rural families and underfunded village clinics. The legal watershed occurred in the 2011 Makanyi versus Anglo-Ashanti Gold Limited Constitutional Court ruling, which struck down statutory corporate immunity, enabling the historic 2016 Nkala and others versus Harmony Gold Mining Co. Limited class action. Certified across South Africa, Lesotho, Mozambique, Swatini, and Malawi, the court ruled that compensation claims transmit directly to the estates and surviving widows of deceased mine workers. This culminated in the 5 billion rand SeMOSHOE Trust settlement in 2019. Yet operational bottlenecks persist across Lesotho mountain corridors. Elderly widows face the loss of paper service books, the absence of historical post-mortem lung historiology, and high transport costs to reach lowland benefits medical examination centers. True restorative justice requires the structural merger of the segregated occupational diseases in Mine and Work Act Odimois into the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Disease Act (KGORONG). Merging these frameworks eliminates discriminatory lump sum settlements, providing mine workers and their widows the lifelong inflation-indexed pension and portable healthcare coverage across the SADC region. The two prime ministers, fierce contestation but converged on SeMOSHOESHOE, the white gold and the gizzard, it was called. Mzumukhehle, the Pan-Africanist and Prime Minister in waiting, equated Lesotho to a gizzard or the stomach. Located in the center of South Africa, it would digest South Africa, was the answer he gave to an uninformed critique, saying why this small country in the middle of another country. Morena Leabua, the post-independence Prime Minister, would talk about white gold, the waters of Lesotho, that will bring life to its neighbors, South Africa. Today, the Basotho and Botswana peoples are renewing their ties through the Purihadi water scheme. Now, as I come to, a quarter, what will SeMOSHOESHOE say? The contemporary, if Morena SeMOSHOESHOE, one were to stand before this assembly today, looking upon the borders of Africa, the economic display of our youth, the fractures of our continental bodies, and the ongoing mineral exploitation of our soil, his voice would cut through our modern illusions. On the question of regional boundaries, SeMOSHOESHOE would ask, why do you continue to worship the straight lines drawn by Major Warden and Sir Philip Wardhouse? Land that was stolen cannot be sanctified by turning brothers into foreigners. If a Mosotho, a Zimbabwean, a Mozambican, or a Congolese cannot cross the plains where our ancestors traded freely without being hunted as an illegal alien, then your African Union is merely administering colonial enclosures. We build a nation by opening the great gate of peace to all who were displaced. You must tear down your paper fences and create a seamless continental sanctuary for our people. That's what Moshoeshoe would say now. On mineral capital and restitution, Moshoeshoe would demand that the gold of Igoli was purchased with the lands of Basotho men to deny a widow in Mokhotlong or Tabatseka her husband's compensation because she lacks a paper document or a hospital postmortem is an ongoing crime. Justice is not a favor granted by mines houses. It is the repayment of a century of blood, sweat, and uncompensated sacrifice. Pay the widows, heal the sick, and reinvest that capital into the fertile soil of the mountains. On governance and leadership, Ekanda Moshoeshoe would caution a leader who surrounds himself with sycophants and silences dissent has already surrendered his realm. The Lekgotla was built on the law that the broth is not skimmed of its fat. Let the people speak. Protect the one who stumbles in speech. When leaders live in opulent palaces while the youth wander without work and the elders weep in neglected villages, your government is built on sand and will fall at the first siege. On food sovereignty and economic development, Moshoeshoe would remind us we broke the Difakani not solely with the sandstone sleeves of Tawapsiu, but with the sorghum of our valleys and the Mafisa cattle shared amongst the destitute. A nation that cannot feed itself and imports its grain from across the river is not independent. Reclaim your agricultural heritage, invest in your youth, and build an economy where no child goes to sleep hungry. Continental statecraft after the AU and the 21st century geopolitics. The transition of SeMOSHOESHOE into the contemporary international arena provides Africa with a definitive grand strategy. The Africa Continental Free Trade after and dismantling the continental enclosures. The after is the modern institutional realization of Moshoeshoe's spatial philosophy, where there is an African, that is Africa. The 55 fragmented national markets of Africa represents the legacy of 19th century cadastral enclosures. By operationalizing frictionless rules of origin, dismantling non-tariff barriers, and integrating regional value chains, the after converts isolated national enclaves into a unified 1.3 billion market mesh. We must modernize the Mafisa principle into regional development finance. That should be our JSE, Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Should we do so, we will be in the first 10 stock exchanges and not number 17 out of the top 18. Sovereign wealth, funds, and continental banks must channel productive assets, capital, and equity into small and medium enterprises, industrial innovators, and women-led cross-border trade networks. Moshoeshoe will be pleased by the water treaty between Botswana and Basotho as reciprocal relations spanning more than 70 years. Advantaged by the presence of Baruti and Teacher Training College in Morija, well before the 1960s independence, Basotho men and women were in Botswana teaching. It was all natural that Botswana would welcome Basotho refugees when Prime Minister Leabua, under influence of the Boers and Roch, declared an indefinite Komatsi. It was again the Botswana, Zimbabwe, and South Africa that would converge in Lesotho in the 1998 coup crisis and restored peace. It is in this connection that Moshoeshoe and Shaka would sit at Ukahlamba discussing matters concerning their nations. The African Union institutionalizing Kanda and restorative peacemaking. If Morena Moshoeshoe, one, were to stand on the plains of the High Veld today and hear the cry of Makahambe, he would recognize it as a tragic invasion of African statecraft, an amnesia of our shared regional history, and a failure to diagnose the true structural roots of socio-economic distress. Moshoeshoe's response would dismantle the premise of Makahambe across 4 core philosophical and historical imperatives. The first, the sanctuary of nation building versus the politics of exclusion. Moshoeshoe did not build a nation by shouting Mabaham. He built the Basotho nation by declaring peace is a wide and open gate. When the Highveld was engulfed in the devastations of the Difakani, he took in displaced refugees, Bafokeng, Batlokwa, Baputi, Batau, and even defeated foes, and integrated them into a resilient, unified polity. SeMOSHOESHOE turning away and expelling vulnerable brothers and sisters fleeing hardship is an abdication of Ubuntu. He would remind today's leaders that true sovereignty is demonstrated by the capacity to absorb, protect, and build with people, not by scapegoating the displaced of domestic failures. The memory of extractive history and shared sweat, SeMOSHOESHOE would issue a stern historical correction. The wealth, cities, roads, and deep gold mines of South Africa were built through the combined sweat, labor, and shattered lungs of men recruited across Lesotho, Mozambique, Malawi, Eswatini, and Zimbabwe. For more than a century, capital moved across the borders freely to extract wealth, while workers were confined to single-sex compounds and later discarded. To turn around today and label the children of those very labor-sending nations as disposable interlopers is a profound moral betrayal. The goal of Igoli belongs to the shared sacrifice of the Southern Africa region. People precede cartography. What will they? That is Lesotho. Wherever there is Lesotho, that is Lesotho. When colonial administrators demanded rigid boundaries, SeMOSHOESHOE answered that sovereignty resides in the human being, not in the artificial lines drawn on paper. Mahamba accepts the validity of colonial border posts, and cadastral fences such as the Warden Line and the 1869 Treaty of Aliwal North that divides contiguous peoples into citizens and foreigners. SeMOSHOESHOE would caution that the enforcing of colonial partitions against fellow Africans merely fortifies the very enclosures that created regional poverty in the first place. What is about it, the diagnosing the cancer, the cause rather than the beating the victim? Rooted in the wisdom of Morena MOSHOESHOE, Morena Kabatu, and the Frank Council of the Lekgotla, Morokgotla Hawukuru Mafura, SeMOSHOESHOE would challenge the state. Why blame the undocumented street vendor or farm worker for the structural collapse of public services, youth unemployment, and institutional corruption? The cry of Mahamba detects public rage at the most vulnerable while leaving the structural architects of economic inequality and administrative failure unaccountable. SeMOSHOESHOE would call for replacing the xenophobic chant of Mahamba, let them go, with the generative, restorative, dictative doctrine of SeMOSHOESHOE, Banna Batin. We must help one another stand and rebuild. He would demand that regional leaders open economic corridors under the African Continental Free Trade Area, ensure fair labor standards and cross-border institutions, and govern by the eternal truth, that motto, Kimodimu, Haabulawi, every human life is sacred. The African Union must dismantle diplomatic evasion by adopting Morokgotla Hawukuru Mafura. Continental peer review must deliver unvarnished, data-driven truth regarding democratic regression, debt distress, and institutional fragility without filtering findings to falter incumbent heads of state. In conflict zones from the Sahel to the Great Lakes and the Horn of Africa, the AU must abandon purely retributive or material militarized interventions. It must apply the restorative jurisprudence of the Mukaida and Batlokwa precedents, securing sustainable peace through amnesty, structural dialogue, economic reintegration, and asset redistribution. I am now finishing. Multilateral geopolitics, active non-alignment, and asymmetric deterrence. In a tribute, in a 20th and 21st century multipolar order, where global power vie for Africa critical minerals, energy corridors, and diplomatic votes, SeMOSHOESHOE offers the blueprint for active non-alignment. Africa must reject subservience to any single superpower bloc, whether it's Washington, Beijing, Brussels, or Moscow. We must deploy the strategic hedging of the Shaka-Mzilikazi Accords, engaging global partners strictly on terms that advance sovereign continental interests. African diplomacy must utilize the Golden Bridge doctrine of the 1852 Berea dispatch, resolving geopolitical disputes by providing adversaries with viable face-saving off-ramps that prevent catastrophic economic or military escalation, while maintaining credible institutional deterrence. Generational value creation and preservation. Generational value creation requires that assets are not consumed in immediate political consumption, but locked into perpetual institutional trust for the unborn. 4 structural pillars through which SeMOSHOESHOE is generated: intergenerational wealth, combining biological assets with distribution, with rapid human capital formation and restorative legal mechanisms. SeMOSHOESHOE did not measure wealth by the private hoard of the monarch. He measured national wealth by the distribution of productive cattle across every contiguous village, the literacy of the young trained at Beersheba and Morija, and the sovereign integrity of the mountain roundabout. The lesson of modern statecraft is absolute. Build sovereign wealth funds that outlast electoral cycles, protect the public purse through radical transparency, preserve the health and dignity of workers, and anchor every policy in the supreme truth that Thank you very much.
Who would have known that a statistician will speak to the heart? And talking of which, Dr. Lekgotla, it is a pity that the VC missed you, your speech when you brought in Sister Peace. So in terms of the feminist component that she was missing in your elaboration. At that note, I would just like to thank you, a little thank that is possible for reminding us to embrace what is called peace, because that's what the world is missing. That is what Africa is missing. That's the cornerstone of every society and every future. And on that note, and for reminding us of the principles and the values of Morena Moshoeshoe, that we can embrace and take forward. Thank you once again. Another round of applause, please. We now turn to the panel discussion. The panelists, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot. So there's a slight change while I announce this. Let me ask the panelists to come to take your places in front. That is our facilitator, Dr. Busisiwe Nsele. And then there's the slight change where Professor Makuku will be replaced by our Honorable Executive Director of the Institute, Professor Kaniu Motswene. So may I ask you to come to the front? May I also ask Prof. David Mello, Prof. Frank Lekabov, both from the TM School, and Mr. Monesa from the MIPL to join us in front. While they are coming to the front, let me just give you a little update and background on our facilitator. Our facilitator, as I already said, is Dr. Nsele. She will be facilitating our panel discussion, and I'm requesting the panelists to restrict their inputs to 5 minutes each. Yeah, 5 minutes each. And then we will afterwards restrict the Q&A to 30 minutes so that we can catch up on some of the time, because I don't want anyone to faint from hunger. That's important. So be considerate for the hungry people in our midst. Have a soft heart in all of this. So Dr. Nsele, she's a postdoctoral fellow at the Thabo Mbeki School. In 2024, she completed a joint doctorate under a Desmond Tutu Fellowship between the University of the Free State and the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam on how South African universities work with the communities around them. How appropriate. I'm going to stick to that for now, and I want you to welcome her and to hand over the chair to her. Thanks.
Thanks, Prof. That was indeed befitting, except that my English has just escaped me because of nerves, obviously. Maybe that's an indication, Bantabadala Sanbonani, we need to move to a point where we can be able to introduce ourselves in our indigenous languages in these university spaces. And that being said, I will say, if you want to remember anything that Prof has said, you must remember that nginguNtsele ngiuLinda Mkhonto. And that is me coming to you to say, we are here grateful for this opportunity, not just to look back. Prof Ndlovu has laid a historical context, and for us today is to take that historical context into our panelists today in terms of putting us in practical solutions. And I hope that this will not just be any other panel, but it will be a panel that will really give us a practical and real solutions in terms of peace building, especially in the context that we are here gathered here today. The thread that has been ongoing this morning is mabahambe, mabahambe, mabahambe. And what we love about both these schools is the fact that we are trying to move away from mabahambe to mabakhulume. So this is the time now that we will give the panelists a chance to engage us further. And I will not be introducing you fully with the bios that I have, not because I'm no Mona and I'm jealous of your accomplishments. I really, really would love to be this accomplished, especially because Prof has been introduced, and then I will literally just move to our panelists and say that Prof. David Mello is very ideal to be here today because as somebody that has led us in the school in terms of peace building governance, and he will give us his own practical implication of what the seminar today is all about. And as we talk here, we cannot leave out the fact that Mr. Menosa traveled all the way from Lesotho, and Prof, when she started, she asked how many people really know the school. And this is one person that comes from the schools and bring all his relevant qualifications, not just his qualification, but his lived experience in terms of SeMOSHOESHOE and the values that he lived on. And as we speak about Ubuntu, we've seen a practical, real example of what Ubuntu is, seeing the VC come all the way from my office to welcome our guests today. So we can say that TM School is a lived experience of what Ubuntu is all about. So for us today, we are being shown an example of what it is to lead with the people instead of for the people. And Prof. Ligaba is one of our very own. He's also very experienced and when published in issues of peace building and governance. And today, he's the rightful person to take us into this decision, into this discussion as we speak of mabahambe, mabahlale, magwenzekeleni. What does it mean in the contemporary times to deal with such issues in light of looking at back into our indigenous lived experiences, our leaders in the past? How do we bring such experiences into practical lived experiences today? And with that said, I will give Prof. Mello the stage to start our discussion today and usher us into this conversation about African Renaissance and how together we can build forward on this discussion. Thank you.
I'm going to the podium. Thank you so much, Dr. Nsele, one of our own postdoctoral fellows. Is it fine now? One. Yeah. Thank you so much. Ntate Padilohotla, I'll start by standing on the existing protocols. But let me start by thanking you for giving us such a powerful lecture on the issue of African Renaissance, as well as, most importantly, SeMOSHOESHOE. Now, your presentation basically forces us to go back in history to look at where we are today in the modern Africa, and also to look into the future. Now, when we look into the past, we can say that from your presentation, I can say that we actually had leaders, and those that I'll call the misleaders. The word doesn't exist in the dictionary, but it's a word that we need to ingrain into our brains to say that among the leaders, they are actually the misleaders. Now, the problem that Africa is facing today is simply because of a leadership deficit. It's simply because we have put people in power who do not understand statecraft. Now, some of the principles that we have reflected on are basically telling us that as Africans, we need to build a prototype of an ideal leader for an African state. A prototype of an ideal leader for an African state would not necessarily be similar to what is in Europe, what is in America, because the material conditions between these countries are different. And I think we should also take some leave out of China. Where was China in the 70s? They were not doing well. Where are they today? They are doing exceptionally well. And therefore it implies that when we think of a prototype of a leader that we want for Africa, we must say, what should be the attributes as well as the principles by which such a leader must be able to live? And when we look at a leader that we not necessarily want, but we actually need them because the economies of African countries are actually collapsing. We have wars. We have continuous skirmishes that are going on in our African countries. And therefore means that there is also a sense of agency that we need in as far as building and rebuilding the statecraft across the African continent. And therefore it means that the type of leader that we actually need is a leader that is selfless. We need a leader who is a visionary. And from what we could surmise from your presentation was that Morena Moshoeshoe actually had great intellect, he had a strategy, he had a tact. I'm impressed where you are talking about Mzili Galezi being given the food. He comes to attack you, but you give him food. And that is compassion, the compassion that you want to see in a leader. Most of the leaders is more about us, me, and my own. Prof. Paswana was telling about another philosophy of another country. Me, and myself, and everybody later. So it means that you need a leader who has compassion. And among the principles that you that you also shared with us, knowing yourself. Now, those who really know themselves, they should not raise their hands if they are classified as misleaders. Because the misleaders are people who are going to lead communities astray. We're now in local government elections now. Anybody and everybody can start a party and can go and canvass. Even the misleaders are in there, wanting to get some limelight. You know, you give somebody power. I think the concept of power is also very important. You give somebody power, and this person become confused. This person doesn't know how to apply the power. This person become power drunk. And this person takes the podium and says, we are here because of the past. But what have you done in the short period that you spent in the office? Because that's what we want to know as members of the public. As a leader, what have you done? And therefore it means that another important aspect is that a leader should be a catalyst for lasting change. Not a change that will last for only the period that the leader is in the office, but throughout into the future. We should be able to say, in the past 20 years, we had so and so as a leader, and these are the results of his leadership. I think you have mentioned a number of issues. I mean, if you say Motho ke Modimo, it means that, you know, Putin would actually not be fighting with Ukraine because of the belief that Motho ke Modimo, and therefore you're not going to be aggressive. You mentioned also the retributive as well as the restorative justice. We've tried that in South Africa, but I think we have not gone far enough, because what you see in the colored communities is basically more about retributive type of behavior. Because so-and-so has killed somebody who is closer to me, in the future I am going to kill somebody who is closer to that particular person. And therefore, if this principle of that is coming from the SeMOSHOESHOE philosophy, if it were to be adopted, I believe that most African countries were going to be much more good in terms of development. You mentioned the Mafisa system. Now, the Mafisa system, within it, I see Ubuntu in terms of leadership. Because this Ubuntu says that my neighbor is not going to starve while I have many cattle. And I'll translate those cattle into rands and dollars. And therefore, the rands and dollars that you have, that you pile up in your bank account, should be able to be used to support your neighbor and your neighbor's children. Now, if we had this Mafisa system, no student in South Africa or elsewhere in Africa should stay at home while people have got multimillionaires. It should be able to assist our African children to... I see you, Busi. You're intimidating me. Now, maybe lastly, a few things. Visi spoke about women. Now, the question is, most of these states that are at war, if they were led by women, were we going to have this war? Perhaps we're going to have even more compassion in as far as interstate relations are concerned. Mabahambe, just to reflect on it, is actually a reflection of the failure of statecraft and the underdevelopment that continues to ravage the African continent. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Mello. I was just giving the lady there my favorite piano song so that the next person that takes more time than the 5 minutes given will dance for us. So, Mr. Manessa, that's upon you that you will dance for us if you take more than the 5 minutes that I've allocated to you.
Oh, thank you very much. Dr. Lehohla, thank you very much for such an insightful and a reminder of who we are and where we come from. You know, when Prof. Ndlovu was setting the stage, he said, it seems we are suffering from an evaporation of historical conscience. And when you think about it, really, right now, not knowing where one comes from makes it very difficult to even determine where one is going. Now, there was also an observation that it doesn't help us to simply romanticize all these good things that we hear about our forebearers and what they used to do without actually translating them into something useful to solve our issues today. And I thought maybe this is high time we, well, in the risk of being provocative, today we are actually using a tool to communicate to one another that historically, really, this is not a language we had on the continent. But it almost seems like it's the only thing that binds us today. And I have a question and I wonder, our forebearers actually used to communicate in their very different languages. And I liked how there was an observation that maybe it's high time we are able to really talk about who we are using our own languages. As beautiful as it is right now to be communicating or using a tool that we have borrowed, but, you know, I think it was Nelson Mandela quoted to have said, if you speak to a man in a language that they understand, it only goes to the head. But if you speak in a language of the heart, I mean, in his mother tongue, it goes to the heart. And what happens to the heart is what gives us character. It is what actually reminds us of who we are. And reflecting on Morena Moshoeshoe right now, I think for all of us has been a good reminder of what it means to be African. There is a saying, and I want to say it verbatim in Sesotho, and I think that is what Ndatelo Hosha was reminding us today, that really artificial horns don't stick. And if we are going to win, if we are going to actually come out strong on the other side, it is actually high time that we embrace our Africanism without actually viewing it as inferior. There is a practice that I so much try to fight against, or I evangelize against, in Lesotho, and I think it also happens among Basotho, not just in Lesotho, where when you want to express something that is of less value, maybe not so desirable, and then we say, "Ke Sesotho," you know. If somebody cooks something and it's not very delicious, but we pay less Sesotho fair, we gaile Sesotho fair. Now, that in itself goes on to show us just how self-diminishing we have become, and we view what comes outside as much more superior. So I think it's this historical conscience we really need to fight to bring it back, so that when we think of Morena Moshoeshoe and his peers of his time, then we can actually reflect just as Ndatelo Hosha has reminded us, so that when we look at our own contemporary circumstances and issues, we're able to reflect back on our own indigenous wisdom without worrying about borrowing it. That is why today we speak SeMOSHOESHOE. And we want to say SeMOSHOESHOE is the solution for the continent. In fact, it's the solution for the world, if we really think about it. So I am really grateful that we got this reflection. And hopefully, as we leave this room and beyond, when you look at a fellow African, it will actually remind us that we are much more superior than what we think. But because we have embraced these artificial horns, they are the ones that causes all these other problems. And I like how you spoke about even the artificial lines that separate us. Because we are such hospitable people, even when the colonizer came, we extended hospitality, and they misunderstood it for something else because they had their own intentions. And I want to end by some observation that when Morena Moshoeshoe actually invited missionaries to come among Basotho, when they taught and they shared what the Bible and whatever they were bringing, he said to them, you know, it's wonderful that you have all these good values and principles, And it seems for you, they are written on paper. You derive them from paper. And then he said to them, but we have always had these values, and for us, they are written on our hearts. It is our code of life. So in a way, I think this is an opportune time and a reminder that for us, it is all written in the heart. And what's in the heart is what influences us to become a different people. So with those few words, I would really like to say thank you very much for this observation, and I hope it sets a tone for us moving forward.
You were about to display your skills. But because I took one value from SeMOSHOESHOE, was that tshwarelo ke tshwarelo. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Am I audible? Yes. Dr. Lehohla, indeed, the address, the keynote address was so inspiring. I don't know which piece should I pick. I thought this could actually make our collection going forward for SeMOSHOESHOE Institute, because we are looking forward for people who are knowledgeable in the context of leadership, peace. We really need people like you to be on board as we navigate this space. But what triggered my attention more is that we can see the world as it is anchored on SeMOSHOESHOE. I could recall when you were saying SDGs. We are now busy out there talking about leaving no one behind, zero tolerance to poverty, what, name them. 15 dictated to us today. What we already know that our forefathers, our great leaders were already on that agenda. We could have, if we adopted such mechanisms as they had, we would now, by this time, not be talking about SDGs dictated by the West. This is an agenda. It looks like an agenda new, but to us, it is history. So this says to us, you have really resuscitated our conscience very much into looking deeper into what we have as a resource to solving our problems, our challenges of every day. You also talked about Morena Mohlomi. Normally, we're at SeMOSHOESHOE Institute, we don't want to call these people king. It is a borrowed concept to say a king. For us Africans, Morena will always be a chief. So Morena Mohlomi, indeed, when you talked about him, I could recall that he is the person we refer to. But the actualization of leadership actually happened through SeMOSHOESHOE. Meaning leaders are grown, they are not made. You cannot come tomorrow to say you are a leader. You should start somewhere. And from the perspective where I am now, is that a leader is grown from a family with all values embraced, like Morena SeMOSHOESHOE was. And all the way up to his upper echelon of leadership, he was grown up by different characters who shaped and reshaped his character. What are we saying with our new leadership, Are we making leadership or are we growing leadership? We are faced with this dilemma today as African continent because we have made leadership. We take somebody who did not even embrace anything in the village. You know, during the time I was growing up in my own village, you would not be selected to a committee or any structure of the society unless you bear some qualities in yourself. Today we nominate those that we love without these values. Then how do we reverse the order? It remains with intellectuals. Now, you can see they are there, they are playing their role in different areas or scenarios. They are prime ministers, they are heading institutions like our own institutions, like the universities, and now they are derailing the whole motive of creating these institutions because they are not grounded on moral values, ethical values. So you were reminding us through this lecture today that we should think about how do we resuscitate or even cultivate new caliber of leadership. As institutions of higher learning, we have a role to play. Let us leave our mark while we live. Let us try by all means, and you shouldn't give up. That's what I can say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. It is clear that the NRF ratings should now be based on SeMOSHOESHOE's core values as we move further. Prof. Likawa.
Thank you very much, moderator, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Ntate Lehotla said it was a serious keynote, a lot to note, and I'm happy our colleagues, I'm the last to speak because our colleagues then teased out all the key issues that are important from what you delivered, Ntate Lehotla. It was great to hear all the points you were asking us to reflect on. But I would want to now reflect on two issues. Busi, there will be enough for 5 minutes. I won't dance. I can't dance, by the way. Yeah. Why worship the borders? It's a question I'm wondering as well, especially if the leaders that are leading our countries, the two countries, come from the tradition that Prof. Sifiso spoke about, the history of interconnectedness, the history of shared liberation. So why then do we worship the colonial borders? And this is where it gets very kind of contradictory. Why the worship of the borders? Lesotho is engaged in a national dialogue. South Africa is engaged in a national dialogue, officially. Although they criticize the process as you may, elitist or whatsoever. Lesotho has went through plenary 1 and plenary 2 agreement. And now Lesotho is speaking about the reforms on how the reforms get to be implemented, the bills that were passed in the parliament, the omnibus bill, now 10th amendment, 11th amendment, and 12th amendment of the constitution of Lesotho. But Basotho are talking among themselves. There is no foreign policy issue from the plenary to itself, the report of the plenary to itself. How does Lesotho, because the report says the Lesotho we want. So how do you situate this Lesotho you want when it's landlocked in South Africa and you don't talk about the relationship that Lesotho you want, how it should relate with South Africa and the rest of the region, more so that you are providing water to the region. So I found that missing. And I was wondering, how is this a national dialogue when Basotho don't reflect on the standing of Lesotho in the region itself? What is missing in this national dialogue? Where else is a national dialogue that Prof. Sifiso says, our leaders are coming from this tradition of understanding the Pan-African ideal, that the struggle is shared. It comes from a shared value. So you get that point missing in both national dialogues. South Africa, we're in a national dialogue. I don't know how far the national dialogue is. I can't really say, but probably this is part of the national dialogues we must have. And I'm happy that we are reflecting on important issues that are of similar importance to the two countries, that are complementary to the two countries. The issue of, then in our national dialogue, how do we reflect of South Africa in the region as well? How do we continue? Because there's this South Africa that Prof. Ndlovu spoke about, that was colonial. And we can't imagine that after 1994, the South Africa that was colonial changed all of a sudden. It was no longer colonial, the colonial relations that were there, the integration of all the neighboring states and all of that. More so in the 80s, 1886, the Nkomati Accord and all of that, the brutality of apartheid on the countries of the region. How do we then reshape this state to be an equal partner in the region, not to be exploitative? And then attitudes of Abahambe then will be dispelled, I want to assume, if our foreign policies are crafted like that. So that is the first issue I wanted to raise, Busi. The second issue is that you then listen to the binational commissions, the conversation in the binational commission between South Africa and Lesotho. What is in these binational commissions? It's not per se about the issues we are talking about today. Then what is it? Is it a mechanism of how we can build the two nations, how we can build the two states? I don't think so. And I think what we are trying to build here today, the relationship between the SeMOSHOESHOE Institute and the TM School, is where we can really spark and shift the debates and input the kind of intellectual discussions that must go, real issues that must go into the binational commissions and all of that. And I think this is the beginning of the great future for South Africa and Basotho, because we have a shared value, we have a shared future, both of us. We can't do, just Sunday, when I was driving to Maseru, that past Sunday, not yesterday, it was warm in Pretoria. But when I passed Tabancho, approaching Lady Brand, I could see what is coming, and I could tell my family that, guys, be careful. They have opened the fridge in Lesotho, so it's going to affect you. Unfortunately, you don't wear blankets yourselves. This side, they wear blankets. So the weather conditions show us how interconnected we are. But why do we remain stubborn? Why do you remain stubborn to worship even the borders, as Ntatelo Hosla say? We become exploitative in terms of the water treaty. We don't make sure that the water treaty is beneficial to all of us in the region. Issues of food security, economic development, and continental statecraft. In Lesotho, the last point, Busi, in Lesotho, I was listening to the radio station, they were talking about Topobocha, among other things, the reforms. And the opposition leader is asking SADC that don't remove Lesotho from SADC agenda. It's a national discourse, it's a big thing, because SADC was convinced that Lesotho has to move out of SADC agenda in Madagascar last year, 2025. So the opposition says, keep Lesotho in the agenda of SADC, because Lesotho leaders have not managed to deliver what SADC expects from us. So that regional statecraft is needed, and is more urgent, not only to Basotho, but to the rest of the region. Thank you very much.
Clearly, no one wants to entertain us today, so they're keeping time. My job now is to take questions from the floor, and I will make an example with myself. I'm not abusing the stage, but I'll make an example of how to pose the questions. Be precise, state your name and where you come from, and no PhD thesis or master's dissertations, please. And you must say whether the question belongs to whoever in the panel or on the floor. So my question today is for Ntate Dogotela Lekgotla. After this amazing delivery, your question would be, if SeMOSHOESHOE were leading today in South Africa, how would he respond to the tension between protecting the dignity of those seeking refuge, opportunity, and confronting the difficult questions of migration, citizenship, belonging, and unemployment in South Africa? How would he lead us in terms of real and practical solutions with finding the balance, as the common thread of today was talking to this issue? So who's after me? Ladies first is Women's Month. In the absence of any other lead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My question is directed to Professor Lekaba. And Professor Lekaba speaks about the Berlin borders, which we have decided not to dismantle and legitimize as African states. And my question is that we're looking at what is it that what makes it difficult to actually build political communities and institutions that emerges out of these borders and create developmental states, because we have decided to embrace them. And I like what you are saying about why are we legitimizing even the border between Lesotho and South Africa. I mean, our people have always been undermining it. And if you go now, Namibia and Zambia, yeah, they are going free. You don't need a passport as a Zambian to go into Namibia. You don't need a passport as a Namibian to go into Zambia. It's just free flow. And they don't have these problems we have here between Lesotho. Who actually are we protecting by creating these borders? Because it's not us. Our people have always undermined this. They have always. Thank you.
Luke, go.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful to be here and to be listening to the history of great leaders that lived before us. And thank you very much for that very detailed history. But I've got a very, probably what I feel has not been addressed quite clearly. We have spoken about how great the leaders were, but we also did not speak about the led, to say what was the quality of those that were being led. Because this question is deliberate, because it sits on those that are not leading. If you're not leading, it's easy to say, he is not doing right, he is not doing right, he is not doing right. And at the end of it all, you bring a list of demands to say, this is what we want, this is what we want. I'm trying to picture back to the great leader and see who his lieutenants were, what were they doing, what were they bringing to the table in emergency case. Is it what we are doing, or we're just zooming this from a very comfortable terrace, saying the leaders are failing, but Tina, what are we really doing to complement and not compete with the leaders? I was at a SADC meeting, and there was a list of demands, and I was worried if President Ramaphosa is going to even read a list of demands when he's got a lot of issues that needs a lot of solutions and not demands. So I just want us, probably in the future, when we speak about the leaders, it will be important for us to also understand who was they? Where was there a religious person? Was there a Nduna? What were they doing? How were they complementing this great leader that we so are proud of today? Thank you very much. What's this? Sorry, my question would go to the main speaker and obviously Prof. Ndlovu, because I think I would really want to understand what was the structure of that leadership. Thank you.
Greetings to almost to everyone. I acknowledge the panel. I acknowledge Dr. Lohotla. I'm trying to be fast to show time. My name is Hlatswani Mufulo. Mr. Hlatswani here is to acknowledge the presence of our Dr. Lohotla And in that, I would like to tell you that here in Mokhotlong, in Lesotho, I'm starting a university of water science and technology. And also here, UNISA is helping me also to have the law side of studies. And also would like to propose to you to use your name as a title on a certain department, and that they would like to talk to you afterwards. As Mofulo, on the panel that day, I would like to tell you on the climate change that Lesotho contributed to these weather changes with water by implementing with the LHDA, those dams, and truly we thank Lesotho for that changes due to these climate changes by water, whatever, apologies. What we are now facing is, what are we as politicians when coming to seats? Because truly there's a point raised here that people get drunk of powers. All these kind of situations we are currently facing is because of political individual endorsement or interest. So now, Lesotho is a monarchy, is under monarchy. And when you have become a political party leader, what is actual on your personal interest, deciding to show to serve the monarchy with? Are you there for personal interest? And I would like to know from the panel that, did you ever try to challenge the polity in this circumstance that politicians, when they get there, I'm so sorry to say this, in 1996, Ndate Mandela called and there's no way Basotho can do such a thing and be having such an international interaction to help us solve the system of running the country. Let us respect Motlotli. And the panel, you have to implement this point that the current situation is because Borena undermined. Habahamba is because the system is very poor among the society because of disrespect. So what are you as the panel going to do back to the society to advise?
Thank you. We'll take the last question and then allow the panel to respond.
Good afternoon. Is it afternoon already? This is Mr. Matiza. Matiza, I'm an African. Let me not say I'm not a South African. Guys, or colleague and academics, I'm an MBL student at the moment. I just want to find out, because we have got a problem, but I think this problem is directed to us as the community. Who is wrong between the community and the government? Or is it the system that we have? Before we can go and blame the border, what is the government is doing to try and help this situation? Are they seeing what they did, what is wrong? How are we going to send one voice to the state about the situation that we're in? Then we say we need a borderless South Africa. As an academic, are we saying, is it going to help? Because it's not all about Lesotho only. I don't have a problem with Lesotho. I was there, the statistics while he was working there. We coexisted very well. So I'm asking, is this a system that is making us as a children of a person to fight over the border? Or it is us as human beings? Because Maba is a small problem if the government put everything in system. I think we are fighting something that is an issue of a governance. So is the government going to pivot? That's my question. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, Busi. Okay, thank you very much, Busi. I really don't know. I don't have an answer to the question Prof. Paswan asked me. What makes it difficult to integrate? Because the bottom line is that you are integrated. When you withdraw cash wherever in Lesotho, you get rents from the ATM. You can buy with rents from the ATM. So I withdrew cash and then I crossed and in Bloemfontein I said, where can I use the maluti? Because I've got 60 maluti and 60 rands, basically. It's 60 rand. It's just that this one is blue. The other one maybe will be brown. Yeah. And I remember a friend of mine said he gave a security guard 100 rands, 100 maluti, thinking that is 10 rands. Because it's green. Because it's green. So what is it that stops the integration? I think it's where we can draw serious lessons for continental integration here. What stops integration when people are integrated culturally? I mean, we're watching Kaizer Chiefs, all of us, and Monday at a painting shop, people are talking about the victory of Kaizer Chiefs. But so today they're saying, hey, Amakosi awinile, hey, Amakosi ajabulile. And I don't see any difference here. This is Mosotho celebrating a Kaizer Chiefs, and he's behaving like a Kaizer Chiefs from Soweto, where Prof. Ndlovu is coming from. The pride they have in this Amakosi and all of that. So what distinguishes our people, I think, goes back to what we were discussing a little bit few weeks ago, the duality of the states in the continent. That there's a state as we know it in terms of the diplomatic channels, the institutions, the constitutions, and all of that. And then there's another layer of the state, which is the people-to-people relations. The state, in the constitutions, institutions, the borders, is the one that inhibits. And because our politicians enjoy elitism of being in the state, this other state that we spoke about, the duality of the state, then they don't see a need of why they should dismantle and fully integrate. I think that could be the only logical reason. I mean, if economies are integrated like Lesotho and Botswana and South Africa, people are integrated culturally in all facets. We drink the same water, we get the same weather. Then what is stopping our integration? And I want to believe it goes back to the question of leadership, particularly political leadership, in terms of resolving these questions of duality of the state. That the comfort that comes with the state, the prestige that comes with serving the state as a politician, I think it's that lie that gets to create a false consciousness among our politicians, not to fully pursue and integrate our nations. I don't have any answer to what Prof. Paswana said. Maybe Prof. Ndlovu, as a historian, and talking of the integration from the political party, the ANC, the liberation struggle, he may help to answer this question. Thank you very much.
Well, for me, thank you very much. I will address a question that says, there is something that has gone wrong with our traditional leadership, that we no more pay respect to our traditional leadership. Well, that one is obvious, that something has gone wrong. Like Prof. Ndlovu said, that even what we call politics today, they were formed, the underlying factor was the traditional leadership, anchored on these very principles that we are talking about. And today we have derailed from that. That's why we don't even observe them, that they are existing anymore. I don't know in South Africa whether you still observe your traditional leadership. But when problems arise in the village, the first person you contact is the traditional leader. I don't know what that means. We ignore the traditional leader while you are in your comfort zone. But when problems arise, you first go and knock at the door, even if in the middle of the night. That's what us, even in Lesotho, we are doing. Because you will not find a politician, and the politician will be not willing to wake up and address you in the middle of the night. And you will actually have safeguarded the whole yard with security. And you will not even access the main gate. So I think we have to go to our historical consciousness, like Prof. Sifiso has actually alluded to this, that we have lost our memory. We have lost something significant that could actually have transformed the society today. We are also even talking about the very descendants of the traditional leadership, how we should also resuscitate those tenets along which they can get this proper grooming of how to handle leadership, because they are still needed even today. So I don't know whether I have addressed the question, but I think for us as SeMOSHOESHOE Institute, we are here at Thabo Mbeki African School, particularly to also gather some, ammunition, see how we can go about putting leadership courses across all sectors of society, which can benefit everyone. So I think the school really is grounded, and indeed it has started work long ago before us, and we believe we are going to get more out of the school. The very lecture of today has actually brought our consciousness up, which is part of the school initiative. So we are saying, really, thank you, Dr. Leswotla, and the entire management of the school, and we really thank you for that. Thank you.
Well, just an observation, really. There were two questions that were directed to the panel, so that's what I would like to attempt, at least. I was in a discussion not very long ago with some people, and an observation was made that, maybe we could have not fallen into the current crisis or problems that we have if our fathers of revolution, after they had overcome the colonizer, would have actually paved the way for a brand of leaders that were now going to come in to usher Africanism, to usher in SeMOSHOESHOE. So part of the challenge is inheriting a system that was initially organized to oppress, and then trying to use that very system to liberate. That in itself has created a lot of problems for us, because essentially, even with, I think what Prof. Leka was talking about, the whole reason we keep having reforms and we have to go back and do more reforms and have amendments is because essentially, we are trying to actually bring about liberation through a borrowed system. And we're trying to Africanize it. And one was saying, how do you Africanize something that was never African in the first place? And when we speak about this decolonization that we talk about today, decolonizing education, decolonizing that, I think we do have a responsibility as academia, because at the end of the day, if we're the think tanks, if this is the hub of knowledge in academia, maybe we need to change our narrative and say, are we going to continue to reform, amend borrowed systems, or should we? And I like the question that Dadele Hosha asked, said, if Morena Moshoeshoe was to come back today, what would he say to the current situation? How would he respond to what we are seeing? And I think in many of the responses was, let us actually go back. Let us actually go back and do it the Ubuntu way. So maybe we need to once again go back to the very systems that brought us into existence as a people and find out how we can actually use them to solve our problems. And I know there's this common saying, African problems need African solutions. And maybe we need to really bring that into reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Perhaps let me address the one question that was posed by the gentleman who's building a university in Lesotho. You asked the question about leaders who are power drunk and who are disrespectful, mentioning South Africa versus Lesotho. Basically, this is a problem of people finding themselves in leadership by accident. They just happen to be there for some miracle, and they don't know how to handle the situation. So it means that for us to go back to basics, we need to have clear mentorship for leaders in Africa, the entire Africa. And this is what SeMOSHOESHOE did, or this is what was done to SeMOSHOESHOE. He was mentored. Borderless Africa, you know, going back to the 1980s, 1985, would a Zimbabwean want to come to South Africa? No, because Zimbabwe is doing well. So if most of the African countries are well developed, then there would not be a desire for people to go to Egypt, Botswana, and South Africa. So the problem is again about leadership. The problem again is about the economics of the country. If there is proper good economic development, I don't need to look to Europe. You saw Africans trying to cross into other European countries, and they ultimately die. This is something that should not be happening if our economies are good. Thank you.
There are two questions that were directed at me, but I thought that the self-imposed, or rather leadership, thrust upon you. You remember Malvolio in 12th Night, that some are born leaders, some acquire leadership, others have leadership thrust upon them. So Malvolio wondered, I don't know what our leaders are, what category of Malvolio they are. In 1869, South Africa ran a census, and this guy who ran this census was very wise, I think, because he didn't not only count everybody, but he categorized them into lunatics, idiots, and others. And there were 210 idiots that were counted. Whatever measure he used, that is very difficult, I can't, but I think there seems to be a need for looking at what measures the definition of idiot. It's something that you surrender your own and forfeit it in order that you get applauded rather. That's an idiot. Now we have to think about how much of Washington consensus we have joined and have been applauded as we lose. My sister, she's married in Nairobi. When she was young, I think I was probably had been born already. She goes to Vepnar. My father had asked her to go and buy some things. And in Vepnar there was a shop. And this Jew was called Mushimane. He inherited the name not from his father, but he was a young boy, and the Basutu called him Mushimane, and he became the shop owner, grew up. So my sister brought merchandise home and was reporting the situation, there. So she says, "Oh, Konana, una shebile a ke bua sekgowa le moshemane. I mean, my teacher was a teacher, so my sister spoke English well and young, and then the villager was looking at her, oh, wana teacher ka bana. So my father is counting the change. Then she asked, Takani, where is the tiki? So my sister says, tiki. She doesn't know. She says, Anna was not admiring your English speaking. She was admiring your stupidity, because Mishman was taking the tiki while we spears English. Now you can transport that to our what the so-called leaders. Now, 30 years into democracy, 13% of us as black people are in the top quintile, against 73% of whites and 40% of Indians. Now, is that 13% of the land? And that percentage has been consistent all along. It's not moving. It's stagnant. I could show you the numbers here, you'll be horrified by what freedom has meant for us. I haven't looked at the ones in Lesotho, but I see. So, whose democracy is this one? When President Ramaphosa gave 350 to us as distress, you know what happened? Black consumption grew from 45% as a share of the total consumption to 63%, 62%. So the money hardly sits in the pocket of the black man, it's gone back to checkers. Now, what economic policy is that? Where you only increase consumption and you don't create production. You ask me, what would have SeMOSHOESHOE done? SeMOSHOESHOE would have said, I have a Mafisa, and I will change the stock exchange, JSE, into a Mafisa of South Africa, where VBS becomes the bank of the people and not close it. That's what SeMOSHOESHOE would have done. That Venda Bank is a true bank of black people, black women. We closed it. They used the money in the Venda villages selling bananas and so on to teach the likes of Marwala to be the head of the UN university. His mother did that, but she's a victim of that closure of VBS. Now, SeMOSHOESHOE would have said no to that, because he would have created a Mafisa. So 350, I would have increased 350 to 750. And they say that this 350 is your consumption. The other 350, we create a bench that creates productive assets in agriculture. Then you create your own bench where you buy from it. That's what SeMOSHOESHOE would have done. When just energy transition comes, SeMOSHOESHOE would have said, what is the nature of this problem? Is it a supply side? Is it a demand side? I'm making this point because I want to come to my brother who is sitting here, Mujale Famefi. He's a nuclear physicist. SeMOSHOESHOE would have asked, if we were to close Komati, what do you replace it with? Now, Komati is closed. The other coal mines are opened in the same space. The children and everything in Komati are suffering. The neighboring ones are not. What conflict now have you inflicted in that society, besides just pleasing the whites in Europe? Now, him and I, he brought me as a statistician, don't know what he does, but we started looking at this problem and saying, are we conflating this? We don't. If it's a supply side and it is a demand side, we can analyze it from both. Now, this requires data now on energy. All energy consumption is split into 40, 60. 40% of energy consumption is consumed in this kind of enclosure, or the mines in enclosures, 60 not. Now 70% of that goes to cooling. Now you have to think about, how do I mitigate that side, rather than conflate both. When you do that, you realize that it is possible to reduce consumption of energy for cooling by 90%. Meaning that in the climate debate that is going on, driven by capitalists, you can actually disrupt that system. That's what we are working on now. I was just telling Nelly Mkabula here that this is the energy system that we are working on. I went to Lesotho yesterday. We were in Gauteng with the Lesotho embassy, saying, "Hey guys, you better look at this energy system." But you think our guys are awake here, they're asleep. That's the problem. Both here in South Africa and elsewhere, we got to Zimbabwe, they said, aha, the universities are participating in this, and we're making inroads to mitigate this problem. What I'm trying to say, from the distribution of income in South Africa, amongst races, to where we are now, we are not addressing the problem. We are not looking at who is the interested party in this, and why are they interested. Unless we start analyzing the data, which I've done now. I was talking to Professor Charlotte, that I've just stepped on something that has just surprised me. That's something I've done. Say South Africa's economy has been siphoned 14 trillion rands for the last 30 years. Part of that siphon is what is happening to Lesotho. And that is what we have to go and address. I've been statistician general for 17 years. I've been measuring GDP in the same way. I decide to measure it out in, I realize there's the gap here. There are two variables. There's the variable of labor, there's the variable of capital. You can go to the industry, you find the same variables. You go to households, you find the same variables, labor and capital. When you add those, when you work on those equations, they must give you the same figure. But when you deal with that out in, you realize that you have a much bigger. Now you are able to go and find out who is the siphon. Mining and financial services, mining siphons 5.3 trillion, 5.1 trillion, financial services 3.1 trillion, retail and so on, and 14 trillion is gone. The question is, SeMOSHOESHOE, if it was SeMOSHOESHOE, he would say, build the siu, create mafisa, and then you do something different. Now, you don't have SeMOSHOESHOE, we have the IMF and the World Bank. That's where the problem lies. For us, we have surrendered our knowledge bases. So we need to do borders. Well, these things are theoric. I've been working on the same kind of system to say, what are the super regions and what will be the variable geometry and what are the... I mean, the Africans, like myself, when I go to New York, I want to know how much my stipend will be when I'm in New York or I'm in Geneva and the like. Now, the data for informing industrialization is used for that by Africans. It's there. I've computed it and I've said, well, these are the super regions and we can trade in these products. And if we trade in those products, Africans know what they consume and what they produce. Then trade starts. In Lesotho, bread is very cheap because we make it ourselves. Here, bread is a little bit expensive. In West Africa, it splits by language. If you speak French, du pain, bread shoots up. If you speak English, or rather if you speak French, bread is in Ivory Coast. It's very cheap. In Ghana, a line in between, bread shoots to the ceiling. Just because, well, behind it is language, but behind it is colonial economies influencing what is happening. So I'm going to the commodities such as bread in 600 families of commodities, that if you analyze them, you understand what your consumption and what your production is, and that should inform industrialization. You think Africa Continental Free Trade looks at this data? They don't. So unless we start respecting evidence, we'll never get there. SeMOSHOESHOE, when Arabuzet and others, he went to church, but he never sat around the circle where the church, he sat outside. He didn't sit in the church. But the church was just a circle there. And then they sit, you know, the Zimbabweans do that too here. You see, they sit in there, outside there. But they have a line that shows that this is the boundary of the church, the Mazanzura. So that was the kind of church that SeMOSHOESHOE attended. But he sat outside. He listened to Arabuzet speaking, and Makwanyani would ask, and if he asks Arabuzet a difficult question, the Basotho women will laugh and say, the white man doesn't have an answer. That SeMOSHOESHOE will find himself having to philosophically pierce through that. For instance, when they talk about the dead arising from the dead, and we actually say in Badimo, there's nothing like that rising from the dead. But we know that the Badimo are there living with us. Now the resurrection. What is the difference between the resurrection and the Arabuzet was caught in that kind of situation? SeMOSHOESHOE had to help him. And he said, have you seen the egg of a chicken? A mother hen will sit on that, and suddenly there'll be something that comes out of there, which is not the egg or the white of the egg or the yellow of the egg, but something else. The white man was saying, where is this man from? There are many of those examples. When he died, they wanted him to what is that thing? To be a Christian. He refused. He said no, because there was a fundamental question he asked. Fundamental question he asked was, I have married 250 women. They are my wives. Now you want to tell me I should choose one. Which one should I choose and which one should I not choose? I'm not doing it. So when he was on his deathbed, they came to try and influence him. He said, my gods have served me so well. Why should I, at this last stage, abandon them? Now, this is what we have to capture from SeMOSHOESHOE. Basotho bare, ngwana kwa dikgomo. Now, here in South Africa, I tell them all the time that 66% of the children don't have the father's name on the death certificate. Now, when SeMOSHOESHOE said, ngwana kwa dikgomo, he sealed the issue of saying, these are the nation's children. Fund them all. Now, NAFSA says, what is the joint income? Joint income when there is no joint anything. Then you think that gender-based violence will ever change. You see, if you don't trace this information of fathers, 62% of them saying they are married against 38% of mothers, and you have a stupid NSFAS thing that just perpetuates gender-based violence. Now, the numbers in the data guide you, and SeMOSHOESHOE believed in the numbers. The question, what were the citizens doing? SeMOSHOESHOE embedded citizens as part of his leadership structure. When they went to war, his children, his sons, will lead the yes. That was what they did. So I took long, but I really think that this discussion is at the heart of our failed economic policies. And fundamentally, our economics are still colonial, extractive, and extracted by whites. And I'm saying the extraction is so bad that unless we touch it, we tackle it, it's not going to disappear. Lesotho has to keep 66% of its water. It doesn't mean you shouldn't let it go, but you must retain 66% of the value of that water. South Africa must retain 66% of its gold. and the people in the mountains must retain 38% at source, 28% within the sovereign. When you do that, then that is what I call SDG 0. If you achieve SDG 0 of 38%, 28, which is 6% retained within the sovereign, then you are guaranteed that you will achieve SDGs. If not, forget it. New York is just a jamboree. Those sessions that I held there are just a jamboree. Thank you.
Thank you, Tata. With just 5 minutes left, I'm asking myself, what would have SeMOSHOESHOE done? And I'm saying to myself, I think we would really invite the Basotho to come back so that we can continue this thought-provoking discussion. And we would encourage the young ones to come to the Tabumbeki School to join Prof. Likawa and Prof. Melo and all our mentors that will take them through such interesting and engaging discussions for the future. And I'm going to take over back to Prof.
I would really like you to thank this panel again and for the respondents being our keynote and everyone who assisted him. So please give them another round of applause. I also want to say thank you, Dr. Nsele, for the charming way in which you have facilitated this panel. That is coming from the heart, and that is what we need at a woman's touch, if I may add. Okay. That was a very rich discussion, and as Dr. Lahotla has pointed out, it cannot stop here. I know, there's much more to be said, but now Professor Ndlovu is going to love me for this. Your voices and your hearts can still be heard. Get them on paper. Publish. Spread the gospel of what it is that will revive, rejuvenate Africa as a whole. So please, I hope you are being encouraged by this discussion and become part of the troops to spread this message. So now we turn to the closure of the session, and I'm going to ask Mr. David Letsoalo to close the seminar and give us a vote of thanks. While he is coming to the fore, you are welcome to excuse yourselves. While I'm asking David to come to the front, just a little bit of background about David. David Letsoalo is our Director of Academic Support, Student Affairs, Internationalization, and Community Engagement. David is an ardent Pan-Africanist and a law academic who is passionate about issues of African unity and solidarity. So it therefore doesn't come as a surprise that he is one of the most successful directors in establishing international and local partnerships that our school has got the benefit of benefiting from. David, the floor is yours.
Dumelang. There was that sense of khotso. So let me follow protocol, not the one said by Professor. This is protocol.
I've also noticed that if you want to read without facing the audience, I've learned this from Professor Lehotla. That's a take-home lesson that I got. Yeah. Now, once again, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I've been requested to give closing remarks, one, and two, to render an item called vote of thanks. I don't know where this thing of vote comes from. It is a vote of doing this, vote of that, but it's not our language. Let's just follow. I want to say that even before I start, confess and declare that me personally, I don't recognize the borders. That's me. At all. So I don't even recognize the construction called South Africa. I was listening, Professor Ndlovu indicating that there was no South Africa until white people constructed something around 1910 or something. So which means I belong to something that is not South Africa, because South Africa was constructed in 1910 as a union by other people. And I needed to say that. And from that point of departure, all these problems that we're talking about, Abahambe, this one or that one, would not really be relevant. We wouldn't be talking about them. The problem is that we have embraced things that are not ours. The other point I want to indicate to frame my closing remarks is that I come from a community in Limpopo, in the Zanin area, where we speak a language called Sitabine. It's close to Kilobedu, although it's part of the Sepedi in the standard way. I learned in the past few years that most of the words that we use in that community are not even in the standard Sepedi variety, but they are in Lesotho. And this struck me so much that for the past 4 or 5 years, I've been going to Lesotho every, what you refer to as Christmas season, New Year. Yes, yeah, indeed. So I wanted to say that this nostalgic nexus that I have, or I have discovered, suggests to me that we are one people, and these things that we are observing are not really ours. And finally, when visiting Kodugu in Burkina Faso, I discovered that most of the things that they do are the things that when I grew up in that community of Batavini, it's what we do, like, forget the language, but everything, the values, the practices, the culture, everything. So that is why I love Africa. And I believe that Africa is for Africans. I want to appreciate all the program participants for stimulating our ability to decipher substance from the thicket and small bushes that obscured the nuggets of wisdom of our leaders of yesteryears, who confronted delicate situations bravely, courageously, and diplomatically from the indigenous knowledge systems perspective. We thank you all for revealing the true essence in historical perspective of what indigenous knowledge system is and how it can be mainstreamed in present-day scenarios without being infantilized and used as an appendage to the Eurocentric institutions which we erroneously and liberally call African universities. I was encouraged by the contribution of one of the participants in the audience who was saying he would like to establish a university in Lesotho, Mokgotlong. I love that place very much. And more especially because around that area, you realize that the waters from the Sentu arrangement are being arranged to come to South Africa to quench the thirst of people who are xenophobic and anti-Africans. Imagine somebody dancing and much at Sorikil Nyora, and I got no mates out of Lesotho. It's just crazy. So, because Lesotho are full of Ubuntu, SeMOSHOESHOE, there is an example from our community. Gore ge motho a na le metsi wena o le ka mo fase o ka mo kwatisa kona o tšea empholo goba poison a le ko godimo a tšhela poison ka kwa gare ga metsi a la a theogela ko wena, and then you know what the consequence is. So we better be careful. So what emerged from this seminar, I've noted one, that there is an alignment between African Renaissance and SeMOSHOESHOE. I don't think you can claim to advocate for SeMOSHOESHOE outside African Renaissance and vice versa. Number two, the relevance of SeMOSHOESHOE to the present day socio-political circumstances. And the other point that I've picked is the essence of peace and unity amongst the peoples of Africa, in particular in the so-called SADC region. I don't know before what people came who would have had this construct called SADC. So what people came and created, whatever they created, and then we start referring to SADC. What is that? Anyway, the other point that I've picked is the inescapable importance of history in context of all other disciplines, or rather, all other disciplines in context of history. If SeMOSHOESHOE were to resurrect today, or if he were watching today, whatever is happening in the continent and the world, what would he do or what would he say? We mustn't even be wasting time about what he would do or what he would say. The response is obvious: utter disappointment. And I believe that people like SeMOSHOESHOE and other African leaders, they are watching, because their ancestors, Professor Ndlovu, advised us that much. And I think wherever they are in serious pain about what is happening in this neo-colonial state, which are failing to reverse to being a truly African scenario on the continent. SeMOSHOESHOE, we have learned today, is an expansive, elastic, and catalytical element to regional and continental development. I have also noted from Mr. Dipapa Monesa, where he says that actually SeMOSHOESHOE is or could be a solution to the world's problems, world challenges. I have also noticed from the deliberations from today that we know nothing much about ourselves. Through ignorance or mental colonization, we don't seem to realize that we have a mine or a wealth of wisdom as enshrined in the principles and pillars of SeMOSHOESHOE. re a tlhatlhatha, re a kwa le kwa, re confused, running helter-skelter, failing to solve problems, whereas we are sitting with real wealth of wisdom as enshrined by SeMOSHOESHOE and other African values and principles. The discourse today has therefore illuminated that there is logically nothing called living in the past. There is nothing called living in the past, but rather we're living in a space where we are reclaiming our future. And that is why there are people today who made the point that if you look at the SDGs, what we refer to as the Global Developmental Goals, you can pronounce them nicely with English accent or American accent. Global Developmental Goals. All these things amount to SeMOSHOESHOE we have learned today. But if you were to say SeMOSHOESHOE, that you might find that it doesn't fit in those corridors of European centers. But it's not new. We have learned today that the SDGs are actually the offsprings of SeMOSHOESHOE. I think that is very, very important. We have problems in this country and the continent because of stomach issues. But I have learned today with that analogy of the interaction between Morena Moshoeshoe and Muzilikazi, that Morena Moshoeshoe apparently would have noticed this thing, that the stomach is such a powerful part of the human body, that he felt that, well, let us feed them, then Batla lose a focus. I think they had a focus, they had a mission, but food or stomach issues can distract you. Transition or transport that point or that analogy to what is happening today, how our leaders are being made to divert and sell out because of the stomach. Very, very dangerous. So, the reason why we don't have true freedom, we don't have unity, no solidarity as Africans, is because we've allowed other people to play with our stomachs, our taste buds, which have encouraged us to lose focus of the true issues of struggle and focus on Hoja. Today, we had an opportunity to reflect and rethink leadership powered by SeMOSHOESHOE. Leadership can be anything, but this one that we're talking about today is the leadership that is powered on and by SeMOSHOESHOE. Ladies and gentlemen, we shouldn't therefore underestimate the importance of this moment, which amounts to a moment of history itself. People who create history do not know that they are doing that. It's only those that come later that was a historical moment. I have no doubt that what we have done today amounts to history making. We have challenged us and our institutions to rethink our curriculum and also emphasize our identity as Africans. I'm looking forward to the curriculum of the new university of Mokhotlong that is going to be built, to say what kind of curriculum will that be. Will you also call whatever you're offering curriculum? Because that's where things start getting wrong. Because you start thinking in the slate and template of the other people. I can go on and on because I'm passionate about the issues that were raised here. Very much so. And these things of Abahambe, I want to be honest with you, it's a huge disappointment. You now would support Abahambe if it were for the people who are the true invaders of the continent. And unfortunately, nothing like that happens to them. Abahambe is about people who look like me and you, and I don't like that. Prof. Paswana, we want to thank you for giving the welcoming remarks warmly and also reflecting on the impact of this gathering to what we're going to do in terms of our collaborations, and also what SeMOSHOESHOE instructs or invokes in us. I liked your insinuation on leadership with reference to that Sierra Leone experience. I want to go to Sierra Leone. So the highlight that we've given about the collaboration between the TM School and SeMOSHOESHOE Institute of Peace and Leadership is really encouraging. And I have engaged in discussions, Professor Mutweni, around partnerships between the TM School and other entities. I want to confess that I've never seen such, tangible excitement by my colleagues around a partner. No equivocation, no doubt, nothing but a sense of true optimism that this will work. So I am really encouraged about this. Professor Mutweni, you touched a lot of nuggets, and I think that you are going to be a very, very formidable partner of the TM School. You really articulated, highly educative, with passion, by the way. We underscored the essence of peace, and that SeMOSHOESHOE, the first, was an icon. And I believe that your presentation indicated how his legacy becomes a remedy to crises and conflicts in the continent. We have the remedy in SeMOSHOESHOE for all the crises and conflicts that we have in the continent. And I also like how you extrapolated and simplified the notion of African Renaissance and how you aligned this to SeMOSHOESHOE. And that is what other people will call pragmatism. And I want to thank you for that. I don't want to repeat what you have indicated because everybody was listening, and I don't want to even dilute or misinterpret your presentation. Professor Ndlovu, I want to really, really thank you so much for superbly giving the background to this project and also setting the scene so that everything that would follow after your presentation would make sense. If everything made sense today, it's because you were able to create a foundation for discourse in this regard. Your notion of historical consciousness raising, I think it's very, very important, and therefore we rely on historical facts and from people like you to rekindle the Pan-Africanist spirit. The ties that bind South Africa and Lesotho should not be limited to that, but should be the ties that bind all Africans on the continent and in the diaspora. So I want to really thank you for being such a historical machine in the TM School. I would like to talk about Dr. Palido Khotla, our keynote speaker today. Why did you stop presenting when we're still enjoying it? So what you did is an act of selflessness. It's basically you giving us a master class as the TM school free of charge. And I want to thank you for that. And that's an act of Ubuntu, your selflessness. But I also want to make a point about you. I respect people who are brave to articulate on issues. And you are one of the very, very few people in this country or the continent that can confront issues without flinching, without being afraid. In other words, you are not a coward. Can you imagine a coward intellectual or being taught by a coward or a sellout? That's tragic. You cannot change society by avoiding the truth and to articulate on issues that are obvious to everyone. So when you said Africa is home to Africans and Hotleke Lesotho, you got us, some of us, excited and agitated. I'm not going to try and rehash what you said, but you must just know that what you indicated today was an act of reawakening for all of us, an act of conscientization in other ways. And I would like to credit you for being such a nexus or a nodal point of history and statistics, politics, international diplomacy, economics, law, and so on and so on. In other ways, you are a personification of what we call interdisciplinarity. When I was growing up, I used to understand that any educated person can articulate on anything. Whether you say somebody is Aristotle or a Plato or whatever, they wouldn't be focused on one thing only. They would be in poetry, arithmetic, philosophy, astronomy, all these things. So what you demonstrated today, you were more like a historian than a statistician. But at the end, you were able to make statistics and data alive and relevant. Finally, I would like to thank the program director for doing so much. You did very well, and I want to thank you so much for carrying out the duties with such splendor and excellence. To our facilitator of the panel, Dr. Busisi Wenzele, you were able to facilitate the panel with such flexibility and ease, much ease indeed. Professor Mello, Professor Frank Lekaba, Mr. Lipapang Monesa, Professor Mutsweni, once again, I want to thank you all for your reflections and contributions in the panel discussion today. We should perhaps also thank the VC for popping in and giving us words of encouragement and also raising the point of aligning SeMOSHOESHOE or the contributions and legacy of SeMOSHOESHOE to the notion of women around him, and in our space as UNISA, framing it within the catalytic niche area of feminist, humanist, and study theorizations. I want to thank her profusely for coming in as such. Most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all, members of the audience, for your participation, for listening, and for enjoying whatever was being presented here. And I can assure you, if you were to subtract yourself from this seminar, I guess this seminar would have taken a different direction, or is in a starch, is that thing. But your presence made us fortified and really enjoy the sessions. Program director, I think I haven't exceeded your allocated time. I don't think she's going to thank me. Let me thank myself, ladies and gentlemen. So, Prof. Paswana, the program director says we should try and come over here to do something of Ubuntu. Am I relevant? Yeah. Okay.
Can I help you? We would like to, at this point in time, just show a little bit of Ubuntu, as David has put it. And Professor Pashwana, on behalf of the school, will you please just present the little gratitudes that is below the reporting, what do you call that thing? You have to, declaration of gifts, the value of gifts that you need to declare. So, would you like them to stand up and come and fetch it, please? Dr. Letlawari? No. Professor Moshwane? Professor Moshwane? Professor, please come. Sorry. You too. And at this note, it was my intention, David. So my colleagues seem to think the very least of me, either being a builder of self-enrichment or whatever, or not being thankful to our person who, our director, who were responsible for the vote of thanks. So I just want to close with the following. Thank you, David. It is clear from what you said that why we left you till the last. Then I would like to say, on behalf of all of us, to David, thank you so much for the work that you do that makes gatherings like this possible, for establishing, because it's all the work that you do for establishing the partnerships. So thank you so much for exposing each and every one of us to the opportunities of a bright future. A closing comment. Morena Mosheshe is remembered for gathering people rather than scattering them. On a morning spent in his name, that seems to be the right note to send you off and to remind you again, keep on spreading the message, keep on voicing your hearts, put it in writing, do it so that we can build a better tomorrow. Thank you to you all. The seminar is closed.